joining us today. And welcome to the Yale School of Nursing and West Campus. Although we are not in our school, but I think that the proximity of it really, makes me happy that we have events here and you all come from the main campus and other places to our beautiful West Campus here. And so I have the privilege to serve as the Dean of Yale School of Nursing. And earlier in my tenure, I remember that I had a very thoughtful, energizing conversation with Dr. Christine Rodriguez, who is here, and who is our Associate Dean for Nursing Impact, about what it truly means to strive for better health for all, which is our mission, the Yale School of Nursing mission. We quickly realized that to achieve this mission, we must think and act differently because what we have done so far has not been enough. I hope you agree with me. If we are serious about improving human health, we must look beyond traditional boundaries. We must recognize that human health and planetary health are inseparable. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we grow, all depend on the health of our planet's living systems. When those systems are in distress, so are we. When people hear planetary health, their minds often go immediately to data. Air and water pollution, carbon emissions, climate change, and etc. But data alone does not inspire collective actions. Knowledge informs, but art transforms. To build shared purpose, empathy, and hope, we need to engage not just in a kind of intellectual way, but also by our hearts. Art and spirituality are powerful conduits for that connection. They allow us to imagine what a healthier, more compassionate world could look like, and to feel our shared humanity in that process. Art in its all forms, music, dance, paintings, weaving, ceramics, performance, transcends language and culture. It helps us visualize, internalize, and express complex truths about our interconnectedness. It can dissolve barriers that data cannot. It is quite literally a bridge. Science is essential to understand for our understanding of our challenges, but science alone cannot move us fast enough toward the changes that we desire. Despite decades of evidence about the consequences of environmental degradation, we continue to struggle to act at a necessary pace. That's because transformation begins not in the laboratory, but in human heart. So today's conversation invites us to consider, can a painting or a poem awaken a deeper sense of responsibility for the planet? Can music or theater ignite the empathy and collaboration needed to heal both human and planetary systems? Can art be catalyst for better health for all people? I believe it can, because I have seen it happen directly firsthand. For over 2 decades ago, my research as a nurse scientist has focused on the ways music can improve the well-being of people living with dementia and their caregivers. And I want to share a very personal story that really gave me the reason to start my research. And I promise that I try very hard to not choke up because it's very precious, story. It's about my dad. And just saying his name, I start choking up. He suffered from dementia. And when he was in his very, very severe part of his life, suffering dementia, he couldn't speak with us. We couldn't, connect with him in the way that we did throughout my childhood. And we didn't know what to do. It was a very, very distressing situation. And once we took him to a restaurant that they had a Persian music performance. And he was sitting at that table, looking depressed as he always did, not being able to talk. He hadn't, spoken to us for a couple of years. And then the music started, and it was classic, music from his time. And then after a while, I saw a smile, appearing on his face. And then all of a sudden, he stood up, he started clapping, and then he started to sing along with the music. That was the first time in 2 years that we have heard his voice. And I was a junior, scholar at that point of time. And I decided to start my research project because I just thought that this is something very magical with this music. And it helped my dad, because since then we started, playing music for him, and he just came to life again. So that was how I really, started my journey of looking at music intervention as a non-pharmacological care intervention for dementia. We discovered that music has an amazing, unique, and a profound impact on the health and well-being of people suffering from dementia. Unlike language, which is localized, music stored and processed across multiple brain regions, including the auditory cortex, hippocampus, cerebellum, and emotional, centers of the parts of brain. And this distributed. Sorry, my tears doesn't allow me to read my script. That distributed pattern may explain why musical memory often endures long after speech and recognition fade. In our study across these years, we worked with people with dementia and their professional and family caregivers. And they experience, ongoing emotional strains, as when they care for their caregivers and also people with dementia. It's a very, very stressful situation that's really burdened both physiologically and mentally people who are involved in that situation. In one of our most recent studies, using an innovative method of collecting and analyzing daily saliva samples, my colleagues and I measured cortisol and DHEAS, that are two key stress hormones, to see, how music intervention, when we play the music on daily basis for them, that would impact to reduce their stress. And our findings were remarkable. With people with dementia, their cortisol level lowered, but not as significantly as their family caregivers. And qualitative data also, really demonstrated that having music being a part of your daily life, how it can really help you, de-stress and, positively impact your mood and energy, and also most importantly, the connectedness between the person with dementia and their family caregivers, that was extremely significant. And that really gave the family caregivers a hope that, what they had lost, the relationship that they had lost, that they came back to them. So music really reawakened the emotional memory with these people. A song from a wedding, a lullaby from childhood. These songs opened doors that dementia had seemingly closed for a while. We watched as caregivers and the loved ones connected again, often through tears and laughter, through rhythm and melody rather than words. Sometimes they dance with each other. Exactly the same experience that I had when I first, experienced that my dad, reacted to that music and then on. What I learned from my research and personal experience deepened my belief that art is medicine. Not just metaphorically, but really physiologically, neurologically, and also spiritually. If music can restore connection between two people separated by the fog of dementia, imagine what art can do for a planet divided by fear, greed, and uh, indifference. Art helps. Art helps us to remember who we are and who we might want to become. It reminds us that empathy is renewable and that our capacity for creativity may be our most powerful tool for healing ourselves and our world and planet. That is why I believe art must be part of the solution to the planetary health crisis. We need the art to move us beyond the paralysis of data into shared humanity that compels action. As healthcare professionals and educators and scholars, we must champion the arts as integral to health and wellness. So let us support art education, music in public spaces, and creative expression in our hospitals and communities. Because the more we nurture creativity, the more we nurture compassion, and compassion is the foundation of all the healing that we need. Art in its many forms may well be not only the medicine we need to restore planetary health and human wholeness, but also to prevent illness, diseases, and to promote health. Thank you for joining us today and for being part of this very important chorus of hope and imagination. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Sunil Amdreth, Vice Provost for International Affairs and Director of Whitney and Betty Macmillan Center for International and Area Study. Dr. Amrit's groundbreaking research explores the movement of people and the ecological process that can connect South and Southeast Asia, illuminating the intertwined histories of migration, environment, and public health. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Amrit.
Thank you, Dean Imami, for that moving and inspiring introduction to this wonderful occasion. I'm really delighted to see you all here. I'm Sunil Amrith, and I'm the Vice Provost for International Affairs here at Yale. So my remit is overall responsibility for Yale's international relationships. And there I really think that the School of Nursing is leading the way, because the School of Nursing has at the core of its mission improving health for all people, wherever they may be in the world. And I think the School of Nursing's global vision, but also the School of Nursing's approach to global partnerships on a basis of equality and reciprocity is a model that so many of us in the university, I think, aspire to follow. So I'm especially glad to be here. I'm also here as a scholar in the humanities, as a historian. My work is in the field of environmental history. And in fact, the question at the heart of my last book was, how did we manage to separate ourselves from the rest of this living planet? How did it become possible for some people to believe that human well-being and human flourishing could ever be detached from the flourishing of the world around us and all the ecosystems that sustain us? And of course, not all people forgot that. There are cultures all over the world where that has continued to be a deep source of common sense and collective wisdom. And I think one of the inspiring things about this event is to bring together all of the different voices and approaches to thinking about planetary health. I'm thrilled to see the word imagination, imagining at the heart of this. As Dean Imami inspiringly put it, we need the data. We need all the data we can get, but we also need more than that. And perhaps that piece is the imagination. I'm glad to see my colleague from the humanities, Professor Moira Fradinger, who's here to give a commentary later on. And just the sheer range of disciplines represented is very inspiring to me. As you all know, the reception later on will include a short musical performance. And Professor Rodriguez later will offer a contemplative session after the talks. And I'm excited to see how this will all come together. I'm delighted now to introduce our moderator for today, Assistant Professor and Associate Dean for Nursing Impact, Christine Rodriguez. Associate Dean Rodriguez oversees the offices of Simulation, Planetary Health, and Global Engagement and Strategic Engagement at the School of Nursing. Associate Dean Rodriguez's research includes gender-affirming care, Native and Indigenous health, innovative technologies within healthcare simulation, including the use of AI. Thank you, Dean Rodriguez, and thank you all for being here. Thanks very much.
Beautiful. Thank you, Azita, for the wonderful introductory remarks. Thank you, Sunil, also for the wonderful, really touched by your story also, Azita. So thank you for sharing with us the history with your dad. As was said, my name is Dr. Christine Rodriguez, and I serve as the Associate Dean of the Office of Nursing Impact, where I'm also an Assistant Professor. I'm delighted to introduce you to today's event, Imagining Healthier Planet, the Power of Creative Expression and Collective Healing. And you're going to basically hear from our wonderful speakers and colleagues today who will describe how the intersections of artistic expression, such as visual arts, music, storytelling, mindfulness, and consciousness are used to process experiences and drive social change. Our speakers will showcase the synergistic power of healthcare, research, and creative expression to explore storytelling, emotional engagement, cultural sensitive advocacy, and overall climate resilience and planetary health. Each of today's speakers will have approximately 45 minutes to share their important work, followed by a moderated Q&A session by yours truly. And then to begin our conversation today, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Dina Costa, who will open today's event. Dr. Dina Costa is the Helen Poiter Jane and Martha Prosser Jane Associate Professor of Nursing at Yale School of Nursing and holds a secondary appointment in the section of Pulmonary, Critical Care, and Sleep Medicine at Yale School of Medicine. A trained health services researcher with nearly a decade of clinical experience in adult critical care, Dr. Dina Costa's research focuses on optimizing organization and management of healthcare with a particular emphasis on the nursing workforce and interprofessional teams. She is deeply committed to understanding emotional, mental, and professional challenges nurses face, and to exploring how creative expression, including storytelling, can serve as a powerful tool to amplify voices, foster resilience, and strengthen communities. Her presentation, titled Holding Space and Giving Grace, Creative Expression as a Way to Support the Nursing Workforce, incorporates real nursing stories as well as creative works. And by doing this, she is able to leave you all with a deeper appreciation for the power of storytelling and creative expression to heal, connect, and transform both individuals as well as programs. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you all Dr. Dina Costa.
Thank you so much, Christine. Well, great. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for coming here. Thanks for inviting me, Asia, Sohani, and the Page office. Thanks for organizing this wonderful event. Dina Mami, really appreciate being here. So I'm going to be talking about holding space and giving grace, how creative expression can best support the nursing workforce. I just want to disclose some of my funding. I will be talking about some of the work here. And so just wanted to disclose I have no other conflicts of interest aside from the funding. So I'm going to start by giving a broad overview of the state of the nursing workforce today. Unfortunately, it's a little bit sobering, but I hope to give you a good sense of sort of where we're at and where we've been in the recent past. I'm then going to shift and talk about how holding space and giving grace, particularly through creative expression, is a way to support the nursing workforce. I'm going to give you some examples of things that people are already doing, things that I've experienced, and just sort of generate some ideas of potential ways forward as to how to do that. And then lastly, I think I'm going to connect to a nursing theorist, which I never thought that I would talk about nursing theorists in a specific presentation, but it all comes together where I'm going to talk about how this can help imagine a healthier planet. So, the nursing workforce is in a very interesting state today. So this is some statistics from 1982 up until 2021, which is data that is the number of full-time equivalents. So this is employed registered nurses that are working in the United States. And as you can see, the blue line, where's my laser pointer? The blue line is the total FTE. And then this is broken up by age. So the youngest is the orange line, middle age is 35 to 49, and 50 and up is the yellow. And what is really important here is to show you that the trend, the number of FTEs of nurses has been steadily increasing since the 1980s, right? Not surprisingly, though, we see a significant dip in 2020 and 2021 due to the pandemic and to a variety of other factors that had been compounding for a number of years. And so we have some additional data that suggests that the supply of nurses in this country, particularly registered nurses and licensed practical nurses, will not meet demand by 2027. So registered nurses are the vast majority of the nurses in the United States. LPNs is another clinical license that one can get to become a nurse for those that are not nurses in the audience. And you can see there's anywhere between 10 to 20% of a mismatch between the supply and demand. Conversely, for advanced practice nurses, we're exceeding demand with our supply. So we should be fine by 2027. However, there's some concerns about RNs and LPNs, which I just said that. So nurses today face, I think, particular challenges. I would not say unique, because a lot of these challenges have been going on for a long time. Again, this is not a post-pandemic circumstance. So as many of you know, patient acuity has been steadily climbing. I think there's been a push to move patients from the inpatient setting to the outpatient setting, and as such, patients in the hospital are getting sicker and sicker. Combined with that, there is a financial incentive to shorten length of stays and get patients out of the hospital quicker, which, while simultaneously also improving outcomes, which seems like a completely infeasible task, right? And so this has been putting increasing workload, particularly on acute care nursing, which is where I spend most of my time. There is also record rates of turnover, anywhere between 18 to 27%. And so this is every year we are losing anywhere between 18 to 20% of the nursing workforce in the hospital setting. We have more recent data within the last 5 years, regionally within Connecticut, that suggests that our turnover rates range from anywhere between 4 up to 27%. So this is national, but we're also experiencing that very locally. We also, unsurprisingly, have sky-high rates of burnout and other forms of psychological distress, which is not surprising given the workload demands, the kind of churn that's happening with the workforce, that nurses are feeling overloaded. This is confirmed by some data that suggests that 50% or more, right, of the time nurses report that the physical toll of the job, the emotional demands, the intensity, the insufficient staffing is what leads to them leaving their position. And about 75% of nurses indicate that they experience a great deal or a lot of stress during their job as a nurse, right? So it's not surprising that these nurses are burned out. So what is burnout? Burnout is defined as a prolonged response to chronic emotional and interpersonal stressors on the job. It was first coined by Christina Masloch in around the 1980s, who's a psychologist, and has slowly been studied in a variety of settings. It impacts personal and social functioning, and there are 3 kind of key features or dimensions of burnout. The first is emotional exhaustion. And actually in the Masloch burnout inventory, which is one of the most widely used instruments to measure burnout, there's a question that is, I feel like I'm at the end of my rope, right? Which I think really typifies that level of emotional exhaustion that nurses are experiencing. The second dimension is cynicism or depersonalization, right? So you kind of remove yourself from the experience. There's a sense of distancing. And then lastly, decreased personal accomplishment. So nurses feel like they are not as effective as they could be in their workplace, right? And this all leads to a considerable amount of stress and distress for the nurses. So this T-shirt is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek, right? Nurses are like pineapples, tough on the outside, sweet on the inside, and will stick you if you rub them the wrong way, right? And I think we all kind of laugh, right? Because it's funny, but I think it also perpetuates some of the issues with burnout and the really sobering statistics we're seeing here on the left. So particularly in critical care, about 86% of nurses met criteria for burnout. About 20% of those nurses have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and meet PTSD diagnostic criteria, right? Which is a medical diagnosis. So 1 in 5 nurses are experiencing PTSD symptoms. During the pandemic, a colleague of mine conducted a national survey in France where they surveyed all of the nurses, physicians, and respiratory therapists working in ICUs and surveyed them on burnout, well-being, as well as peritraumatic dissociation. And they found that out of all of the clinicians, nurses had the highest rates of peritraumatic dissociation, which is defined as the temporary state of altered consciousness and perception that occurs during or immediately after a traumatic event, which is triggered by intense stress and fear during that event, right? So nurses were experiencing the highest rates out of all clinicians, which to me is startling. I remember when this paper came out, it was jarring to think that nurses were in dissociated states as they were working during the pandemic. And lastly, there is lots of evidence that nurses have the highest rates of suicide of all health professions. This was data that came out from the United Kingdom from 2011 to 2015. There is newer data in the United States that suggests the same situation, that nurses have the highest rates of suicide. Health professionals have a higher rate of suicide, I think, than the general public, and nurses have the highest among that group. So we know burnout exists. We know there's a significant impact to burnout on the nurses, but what about what it does to the system and to the patients? And so increased burnout is associated with decreased patient and nurse satisfaction. It's associated with lower quality of care. And then not surprisingly, clinicians are leaving and turning over more often if they're feeling like they're at the end of the rope in their work environment. This paper was very interesting. It was conducted by a colleague of mine, Leslie Kelly, where they surveyed nurses in 2018 and 2019 and asked them about burnout as well as turnover. And what they found was that a 1 unit increase in burnout, so 1 unit increase in the score using the Maslow burnout inventory, was associated with a 12% likelihood of the nurse leaving the organization, directly demonstrating that burnout leads to organizational turnover. They describe what I found really interesting as a potential mechanism here is secondary trauma. So they dug a little deeper and found that nurses who experienced 1 patient death in the last month had about a 40% increase in burnout over the course of the following year, right? And as the nurses in the room, we know patients die, right? That happens on sometimes a daily basis in the clinical setting. And so simply by going to work, essentially, nurses are having an increased risk of burnout, or rate of burnout, I should say. One thing that always comes up when I present these data is, oh, this is just a post-pandemic situation, right? The pandemic strained the workforce, strained healthcare, and that's what it is. And we have data actually immediately preceding the pandemic, December of 2019 through February of 2020, where they surveyed nurses in New York and Illinois about burnout, intent to leave, and job satisfaction. And they looked at nurses in ICUs and medical surgical floors, so regular hospital floors in New York City and in other settings. And what they found was that about 50% of nurses, whether you were in New York City or not, whether you were in a medical surgical floor or an ICU or not, you had around 50, nurses were reporting around 50% indicated as high burnout, right? So considerable amount of burnout. 30% were reporting job dissatisfaction, and about 1 in 5 were reporting intent to leave their position in the last in the next year, right? And so immediately going into the pandemic, particularly in these states, and I would say everywhere, nurses were not in great shape, right? The workforce was already under stress. And I like to say that the pandemic just kind of turned up the volume of the issues that the workforce was experiencing, that are continuing to experience, 2-3 years post-pandemic. So I've given a bit of an overview of sort of where we are with burnout and the nursing workforce and turnover. And so how does this tie to creative expression? So I'm going to switch gears here and really talk about how holding space and giving grace through creative expression can support the nursing workforce and hopefully minimize burnout, minimize turnover, and improve retention. So there are a number of forms of creative expression. You're going to hear about art from Dr. Prescott, music from Dr. Alsop, and this is just a snapshot of some that have been published in a systematic review in the International Journal of Nursing Studies. And so listening to music, artwork, and particularly guided viewing of artwork in the systematic review, they really talk about that was critical, having somebody take you through and describe the artwork, which I think we're going to have the opportunity to do that with Dr. Prescott with some audio. So more on that later. Storytelling, whether that's oral or written, photography, and painting, drawing, or what was termed in this paper and others as art making. And so this is just a snapshot of some forms of creative expression. So what is holding space? What does that mean? So holding space refers to the act of being fully present with someone without judgment or distraction, right? I really think of it about creating a safe and accepting environment, listening effectively, empathizing. And when I hear this definition, I think nurses do this for patients and families all the time, right? Like this is part of our job. We hold space. We also give grace. And we have no problem doing it for our patients and our communities. We have a much harder time doing it for ourselves. And so there has been a lot of ways in which I think we can offer space for nurses and hold space for them. One thing that came up when I was conducting a multi-study ethnographic research project in ICUs in Michigan, when I was asking nurses and physicians about patient and family engagement. How do you engage patients and families? What struck me was in all of the interviews that I did, every time I interviewed a nurse, they cried during the interview. And I remember walking away, and I was not asking particularly sensitive questions. And I remember walking away from this thinking, we are not supporting the nursing workforce enough, right? The fact that all of these nurses are crying in a research interview, I'm not a psychotherapist, I should be doing this. And it was not, it was a pretty diverse sample. We had about 60% women and 40% men in the sample, which is atypical, I think, for the average nursing workforce. But there's two stories that two nurses shared that I'm just going to read to you right now, which I think just really speaks to the need for nurses to have a space to share. So this one nurse said they put him on a specialty bed. He got up to 100% PEEP of 18 and he died. So the 100% and PEEP of 18 for the individuals who are not clinicians in this room is very, very high ventilator settings. He got a pneumo, which means that he had like a hole in his lung, and he died. And I don't feel anything. That's the scary thing. I don't feel anything. And this is when the nurse started to cry. This was a man. I was a very emotional kid, very emotional. And this job, if I want to do this, I've got to deal with, I have to get used to this. This is just the way that it is, right? And I walked out of that interview like, oh my goodness, like I need to go to therapy now. And that was one story. This next story haunts me. So this was a nurse who was around 50 years old, and he was an ICU nurse and was talking about a patient that he cared for. And he said, when my son was 21, this kid was 21. He had a chronic lung disease that was going to kill him. Big family there. He started to desaturate, which means his oxygen level started to drop. So I tried all my tricks, meaning tried to kind of get his oxygen level up. And I had to pop him off the ventilator and bag him, right? So you attach an ambu bag and you manually put in air into the patient. He was conscious and his family was there. His family says to him, Do you want to go to Jesus now? And the kid says, yes, I don't want to go back on the ventilator. So now what do? I'm standing there literally holding the bag. And it was kind of dark and it was in the evening and it was November. And that one bothered me just because of his age and because of the situation. This had happened 20 years prior. And the level of detail that this nurse had about that experience, I mean, I'm getting chills even thinking about it now. It broke my heart that he carried this, and now I carry it vicariously, essentially. And so I think this was my first indication that research is an opportunity to provide space for nurses to share, and nurses want to share, and we maybe need to do that a bit more often. Okay. Medical journals, many of you may know, clinical journals are often not outlets for creative expression, right? They're often formulaic research papers. In 2018, this paper was published by Jennifer Leckie, who is an ICU nurse out of Oklahoma. It was in the Annals of American Thoracic Society, which is a large professional society that I'm quite active in an innovation and provocation column, which is really meant to stimulate discussion. Not meant to be narrative, not meant to be creative, but to stimulate discussion. And so Jennifer wrote a creative piece, essentially, describing her experiences with burnout over the last 10 or 15 years. And she says, this essay is meant to be a simple story about me, a nurse who could not save my patient, did not have adequate support from my facility or friends, and how a friend of mine in similar straits killed himself. And so it's about a 1,500, 2,000 word essay on her experiences with burnout, with psychological distress, with PTSD, and ultimately with one of her colleagues committing suicide. Towards the end of the piece, Jennifer says, all of us have our own burdens, names chiseled on our hearts. We carry their bodies in silence. We carry them alone, refusing to cry. We hold them close and keep the living at arm's length. We shouldn't carry these bodies alone. They want us to carry them home and then let go. They didn't die so that we could watch each other suffer. Our patients, our families, they deserve more. They deserve more. We deserve more. And this piece, I think, was really amazing in instigating and in changing the conversation within critical care about burnout. Me and the outgoing president of the American Thoracic Society had the opportunity of writing a companion editorial to it, where we really talk about how caring is a fundamental component of high quality critical care. Yet in the often myopic view to maximize the lives of others, we fail to recognize the chronic and insidious undoing critical care can have on clinicians. Leckie's essay alludes to several costs ICU clinicians pay in the act of caring. And we really wanted to begin to change the conversation and push people to start thinking about this is an alarming trend in the critical care workforce that needs attention, not just burnout, but severe psychological distress. It really highlights, I think, the lack of support for the act of caring, right? We don't do enough, I think, in this country to support those who care in all capacities, formal and informal. It touches upon the stigma surrounding mental health issues and really alludes to the need for multi-pronged solution. And so in this piece, Mark and I really have a call to action for we need to generate multi-level solutions that address this issue for the entire critical care team, not just. And so again, this is an example in an atypical format or an atypical publication where nurses can share their stories, written at least. Jennifer, this was back in the heyday of Twitter, pre-X. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but Jennifer started a handle called The Haunted One, Those We Carry. And what it was an anonymous, she managed it, and clinicians could write in stories and she would anonymously post them. And so it was a way for clinicians to feel like they're sharing their stories without compromising patient, HIPAA and keeping patients' identities safe. And so there's just two pieces that I just want to read from them. So this one was, she just passed away. Thank you for letting me know. I don't know what to do with the cake, the nurse replies. X, I hope you're close to the end of your shift. And the nurse says, It ended 3 hours ago, but I could tell she was close and did not want her with somebody she did not know, right? So a perfect example of nurses, I think, holding space and giving grace to patients. Another one was you weren't expecting to pass then. You were screaming in pain. Nothing I did made it better. You were a DNR, do not resuscitate, but not comfort measures. When the team came in, we realized you were dying. They left. I sat there and held your hand in silence. I cried all the way home, right? I think many of the nurses and clinicians in the room, I standing here can remember driving home sobbing, right? Or leaving a shift being like, I'm going to come back and the patient's not going to be here. And how do we process that? How do we deal with that? Photography is another form of expression, which I am not creative in any sense, and so I always admire artists in many, many ways. But this was a project that Angelo Merendino did during the pandemic. He's a photographer, Italian-American, who took pictures of nurses all over the country. And if you go to his website, you can see all of these beautiful images of nurses. And this one nurse, I loved what she said. She said, as a nurse, we see patients at their most vulnerable times. To be part of something greater than yourself, to be used as a vessel in order to exude love, care, and compassion during someone's most dark and unguarded times is truly both a blessing and a privilege. And I think it would be naive of us to think that that blessing and privilege comes without a cost, right? There's a cost that I think the clinicians bear for that. Willingly bear, but we bear it. This is another photojournalist. Alan Hawes is a registered nurse, but previously was a photojournalist. He works at the ICU in Medical University of South Carolina. And during the pandemic, NPR actually featured his stories and his pictures where he took pictures of all of the nurses and clinicians during the pandemic in the ICU where he worked. And there were two that I felt really struck me. This is a respiratory therapist that's looking out of the window of a patient's room looking for help, all gowned up with somebody else in the background, which I think just provided an intimate view of the work of nurses that I think many people don't see unless you're on the receiving end of that care. This was another image of the team of nurses moving a patient that was prone. So during the pandemic, patients were put on their bellies to help with oxygenation. We've done that. We did that even before the pandemic. And it is both a physically taxing job to turn the patients back and forth, as well as emotionally taxing. You're worried about the ventilator popping off. You've got all of these tubes and lines, and it really requires teamwork. And I think Angelo really captured sort of the gist of that work here. The medical pause is another approach that people have used, and this is, I think, was in 2014, so about 10 years ago, where it is an approach that anyone predominantly within critical care or the emergency room, any clinician can call for a medical pause, and it happens typically after a challenging patient circumstance. And so Jonathan described the medical pause where everybody just stands quietly and sort of holds space for one another. The pause slows our racing minds, offering mental space so that we are not drawn into the vortex of failure versus success. We give ourselves the opportunity to forgive and be forgiven. It is both communal and individual. We are called to bear witness to the reality of loss and the acceptance of reality. And so this has been happening in ICUs and emergency rooms since 2014 and did occur during the pandemic. And is just another way of offering space. I talked a little bit about art therapy. This was a very small study, about 20 people, published in the Arts and Psychotherapy, which is a journal that I didn't even know existed, where they had about 20 nurses in the UK participate in small groups within guided art viewing. And so they had a facilitator that took them through a bunch of paintings or images, and then art making in these small groups. Again, these were not artists. And the nurses described art making was initially intimidating, but they reported it as revealing true emotions linked to work stress issues, which for some led to action to alleviate their impact, right? And so it felt like the art making, yes, was intimidating, but I then was able to understand how it linked to my emotions and my emotions linked to my work. And then some of them took action, such as psychotherapy and other approaches to address it. art viewing. And so this was a guided art viewing experience where they had the images in the cafeteria. It was somewhere within the hospital. And the nurses described art viewing as offering a positive association so that the participants could be reminded of that while at work, right? So you're having a difficult day, you go down to the cafeteria to get some lunch, and there you see the images along the wall, and you're reminded of this facilitator taking your small group through and talking about the payments. And so it was a way to enforce positive associations. Giving grace, what does that mean? So it involves offering yourself and others compassion, forgiveness, and understanding, exercise of love, kindness, mercy, favor, the disposition to benefit or serve another. Again, I think what nurses do on a daily basis. Code compassion is an example of giving grace that has been implemented. My colleague Leslie Kelly has done this, where it's particularly in any acute care setting in her hospital, they could call a code compassion. And so what would happen was a clinician would say, you know, this was a challenging circumstance similar to the medical pause. A code compassion would be called, and a trained debriefer, which I think was really the critical piece, food, hot chocolate, and mindfulness approaches would come to the unit in the break room on like a compassion cart, right? And I think it was a way of bringing to the nurses and clinicians compassion and kindness and space and grace, and was very effective. I don't think it's been widely taken up, but is a great idea. Talked a little bit about the power of storytelling, whether that's oral or written, as a particularly reflective practice. One of the strengths of storytelling is that there's been lots of evidence that using storytelling is a way to help facilitate post-traumatic growth. So you're growing from the traumatic event and not necessarily having PTSD or other negative consequences. A colleague of mine, Jin Jun at Ohio State, conducted a small pilot with Story Center, where they had audio and visual digital stories that nurses provided after a shift on their phone. They included music and photos and popovers, et cetera, voiceovers, et cetera, and then informally shared these stories in the group, and they all watched the diaries together. When they asked the nurses afterwards, was this helpful? What was a barrier? What was a facilitator? There were three themes that emerged. So the nurses felt like the digital storytelling intervention fostered human connection, it fostered healing, and it was really helpful within the nursing workforce. One nurse said, nurses are always there to pick up the pieces for everybody else. We have our stories, but we have our trauma. I think what the storytelling does is dig into nurses and expose some things we don't want to disclose. We put all of that in a back burner because we have to do everything for everybody else. Listening to other stories feels so much a part of something bigger than my own personal experiences and helps with healing. Maybe it's the shared emotions, like sometimes the release of emotions, being heard and being seen as a human, not just as a nurse. Our whole job is all about secondary trauma, hearing stories that are so challenging that you have to be able to put that somewhere. Storytelling is a way to do it. I feel significantly more energy afterward and the ability to be kind to my client. Storytelling is not just for bedside nurses. So there's been two small studies that were published with nurse executives and nurse leaders, suggesting that storytelling is helpful for nurse leaders also in processing their experiences, who are often in kind of caught in the middle of the bedside nurses that have demands and are complaining of workload, and then the C-suite, right, that's pushing to minimize costs. So I've given you a broad overview of some forms of creative expression, music. This is sort of like a quick survey of what the landscape is like. I think that we have lots of opportunity to support the nursing workforce in this way. And I think it's one way that we can help begin to move towards imagining a healthier planet. And the reason I say that is because of work of Sister Callista Roy, who is a nurse theorist and a professor emerita at Boston College, College of Nursing, School of Nursing. And Sister Callista Roy had developed the Roy adaptation model. like I said, I still can't believe that I'm talking about a serious scientific presentation. If you told me as a first-year PhD student I'd be doing that, I'd laugh at you. But Roy's adaptation model really talks about humans as holistic adaptive systems in constant interaction with internal and external stimuli and the environments, and that humans really need to maintain integrity and adapt in the face of such stimuli. And Roy posits, and I agree with her, that the goal of nursing is really to foster successful adaptation, right? So our job is to help individuals and human beings adapt to their environment, to their health, to their illness, and that's our job. Sister Callista Roy comes at this from a perspective of cosmic unity, which I find fascinating, where she talks about persons and earth have common patterns, mutuality of relations and meaning. Persons through thinking and feeling capacities rooted in consciousness and meaning are accountable for deriving, sustaining, and transforming the universe. And I think this is really a clear call to nursing, right? And the integration of nursing and our goal of fostering adaptation of human beings with their environment, with the planet, with the universe. And she mentioned sort of the 4 key concepts or the meta paradigm of nursing, which is really, we focus on person, we focus on environment, we focus on health, and we do that through nursing. And so I hope I've given you a broad overview of how the state of the nursing workforce, although it's a bit somber, I have a lot of hope. We are a really large profession. We are a profession with considerable empathy and compassion. And I think if we begin to turn that on ourselves, we really might help. And how holding space and giving grace can do that, and then how this can imagine a healthier planet. Because in my perspective, right, if we don't do this, who will? How will we have a healthier planet if we don't do it? And so I want to thank you for your time. That's my email address. And this is a lovely picture of my oldest son with a very famous Yale alumni. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Costa, for kind of guiding us through the journey of the front line of what nurses do, and then the power of storytelling, creative expression, and what that's utilized within healthcare, specifically within the nursing field. I'm delighted to introduce our second speaker today, which is Dr. Susan Prescott. Dr. Susan Prescott is a pediatrician, immunologist, and an internationally acclaimed physician scientist, well known for her cutting-edge research into the early environmental determinants of health and disease. Globally, she is recognized for her work on the interconnectedness between human health and planetary health, thus promoting mutualistic value systems for both ecological and social justice. She is also the director of the NOVA Network, a transdisciplinary global community providing evidence, inspiration, and advocacy for the health and flourishing of all people, places, and planet. In addition to over 300 scientific publications, she is also an artist and an award-winning author of several books. In Finding Common Ground, she maintains that we can work together to address many global problems, recognizing the direct connections between personal and planetary health. Her passion for this exudes, as you will hear shortly in her presentation titled, Seeding a New Story, Inspiring Planetary Consciousness for Personal and Collective Transformation. Without further ado, we welcome Dr. Susan Prescott.
Beautiful, thank you. And we can just dim the lights across the front. This would be beautiful. Well, it is a real honor to be here with you all, with such wonderful people doing such important work. And I really do want to congratulate the organizers for the vision behind this session. It really speaks directly to the heart of meaningful change, because no matter how many technical solutions we develop, they won't truly serve us or the planet unless we apply them with more evolved worldviews, rooted in compassion, connection, and care. And I also thank you for inviting me to share my art as I talk about my work in planetary health and how it connects to the deeper need for spiritual and cultural transformation as we address our complex challenges both locally and globally. And as you heard mentioned, there will be some of my art on display outside with audio descriptions, but you will see another 300 or more images here right now. So I'm a pediatrician and an immunologist, and I've worked for over 30 years in the health sector. But for the last 14 years, I've also been leading a global planetary health network, exploring the ecological relationships across all systems and at all scales, from the foundational microbes, which are vital to all ecosystems, to the complex web of life that collectively contributes to the health of planetary systems. It also includes our social and our cultural ecology, our spirituality, worldviews, and the values that define and shape our relationships with nature, with others, and with our own inner capacities, as you've been hearing about. As an artist, a central part of my work is weaving creativity into this broad agenda, inviting inspirational narratives that unite intellectual insight with heart-centered understanding for meaningful change. And I'll talk about this more in a moment. But like many others here, this is my life. It's not just my career. I do this for the sheer joy of wanting to connect to the universe around me and within me and to make a real difference. I work transnationally as a professor of planetary health at the University of Western Australia, and also as director of the Centre for Planetary Consciousness and Global Flourishing at the Nova Institute here in the US, where we weave together science, spirituality, systems thinking, creativity, community into a cohesive transdisciplinary approach to healing our relationships within ourselves, across communities, and with the living earth. And today, I really want to share that vision of planetary health that goes beyond overcoming threats to our biophysical planetary boundaries to include the toxic social, economic, political, and spiritual climates at the source of so many of our global challenges. Because addressing these challenges ultimately requires a profound shift in consciousness, a transformation in our values and worldviews that reaches that deeper underlying root causes, like any true healing process. So, the Anthropocene is really defined by this profound and large-scale impact of human activity on Earth's natural systems to such an extent that these effects are measurable in sedimentary records. It also marks an unprecedented era of greed, consumption, and a grim escalation in the destructive potential of war. While debate continues over exactly when the Anthropocene began, evidence points to the early mid-20th century, with sedimentary indicators such as plutonium-239 from nuclear detonations and measures of mass fossil fuel consumption and widespread use of industrial chemicals and fertilizers. However, these geological records fail to capture the more fundamental effects of urbanization at the microecological scale, as the original life forms, which are still foundational for all life on Earth today, microbial disruptions have major implications for ecosystem stability and nutrient cycling in virtually all ecosystems, including our own. The profound impact of industrializations on these pivotal microbial systems is at the root of widespread ecosystems disruptions spanning from soil systems to our own human microbiomes. Dysbiosis, which literally means abnormal or difficult living, really reflects life in distress and breakdown of the symbiotic balance in relationships that sustain all life. And the term dysbiotic drift describes the interdependent adverse ecological shifts with urban industrialization across all systems at all scales. This recognizes that the disruptions we see on the macro ecological scale, including polluted environments, unhealthy food systems, sedentary living, and poverty, also produce those cascading impacts at the micro-ecological scales. And the resulting changes in the human microbiome exacerbate inflammation, metabolic dysregulation through multiple pathways across the lifespan, driving this mounting global burden of non-communicable diseases, or NCDs, which are another defining consequence of the Anthropocene. This new perspective of ecological interdependence highlights that our current health crisis cannot be separated from the social, economic, and political systems driving dysbiosis at all scales. The emerging concept of planetary health has now emerged as a particular field to provide more integrated ecological frameworks to address these interconnected challenges. Planetary health is defined as a solutions-oriented transdisciplinary field and social movement focused on analysing and addressing the impact of destabilising natural systems and how these relationships impact the well-being of all life on Earth, including our own. As such, planetary health is not simply another iteration of environmental health. It takes a whole-of-society approach that gives greater consideration to the wider social and commercial determinants of health and justice. It also expands concepts of human health from well-being to flourishing, which has been defined as the relative attainment of a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good, including the context in which that person lives. And we can extend that, of course, to all non-human life as well. This perspective broadens the focus from the physical, social, and economic resources to also include relationships, happiness, purpose, and meaning. These principles of planetary health echo many ancestral and Indigenous knowledge systems, which emphasize the interconnectedness of all life and the moral imperative of living in balance. To harm the earth is to harm the self. In the modern era, this perspective was also powerfully evoked by the iconic Earthrise photograph taken during the Apollo 8 mission in 1968. This outward journey shifted humanity's focus inward to our own condition and that of our troubled planet. It inspired a profound reawakening that led to large-scale social and environmental movements, including the first Earth Day in 1970s. While Western concepts of planetary health emerged in the 70s and 80s, they really remained outside the mainstream medical discourse until about 2015 with the Lancet Commission report, which underscored the inseparability of human health and Earth's natural systems. This catalysed the formation of the Planetary Health Alliance, a global network now spanning more than 450 institutions across 75 countries. And I have the honour of serving on the steering committee. These integrated perspectives also encourage us to see the human health crisis as an ecological crisis, which calls for ecological solutions beyond the siloed thinking and fragmented approaches that still permeate our institutions and our societies. Curiously, around almost the same time of the 1968 Earthrise photograph, when that stirred this global shift in consciousness and awareness of our planetary fragility, a microbiologist called René Dubos issued a prescient warning, which was largely overlooked at the time. He foresaw that widespread biodiversity loss, antibiotic use, and urban lifestyles would alter early immune development and have profound consequences for human health in generations to come. While the significance of this was largely unappreciated, his insight has proved remarkably accurate in predicting today's pandemic of inflammatory and metabolic conditions linked to microbial disruption. In the decades since, research has confirmed how lifestyle, diet, and built environments shape the human microbiome, our vast community of microbial partners. This shift in understanding has transformed our worldview from seeing microbes only as threats to recognizing them as essential allies for our evolution, or in our evolution, vital for our metabolism, mood regulation, and overall well-being. We now know that more than half of our cells and 99% of our genes belong to these microbial passengers. And we've seen how large-scale adversity, whether from poverty, pollution, psychological stress, promotes inflammation at the cellular level, fueling this modern non-communicable disease pandemic. Most NCDs, including acute and chronic mental health disorders, are tied to metabolic dysregulation and inflammation, with mitochondrial dysfunction playing a central role. And I was excited to see an abstract on the display outside about this. These delicate organelles are essential for repair and vitality and are exquisitely sensitive to environmental conditions. Modern exposures, ultra-processed foods, chronic stress, environmental toxins not only influence mitochondria directly, but they're also disrupting the microbiome, creating that vicious cycle of oxidative stress, metabolic imbalance, and inflammation. Over decades, my own research as a paediatrician has focused on how early physical, emotional ecologies set the trajectory for lifelong health. And as an immunologist, how large-scale adversity promotes inflammation at the cellular level. My early research showed that these environmental effects actually begin before birth, influencing immune development in the first months of life. This underscored that the epidemic rise in infant allergy is really a sentinel marker of these impacts on immune health more generally, foreshadowing the rise in so many other chronic inflammatory conditions, obesity, mental ill health among them. One significant factor underlying these trends is our progressive disconnection from nature across generations, raising concerns about an extinction of experience that diminishes healthy microbial contact, along with the many other physical, emotional, and even spiritual benefits of nature connection. This is now approaching a point where new generations may not even be aware of what has been lost. Today's screened focused generations, for this generation is particularly pronounced, with digital immersion not only displacing outdoor experiences, but also carrying its own physical and mental health risks. This disconnection is also linked with erosion of pro-social and pro-environmental attitudes and behaviours, essential for collective well-being and sustainability. So while ecological restoration is vital, it's equally important to address human behaviours, attitudes, and the social policies that influence dysbiotic drift. This awareness is now leading to so many nature-inspired strategies that rebuild nature connection for broad benefit. And in just recent decades, our scientific understanding has really shifted our worldviews dramatically from this battle stance against microbes to recognising our deep interdependence with them, and by extension, with the natural world that sustains us. This has not only changed how we see health, but also how we see our place in nature. And this unseen world illuminates the profound interconnectedness and dynamic interplay between our bodies and the planet, challenging traditional concepts of self and individuality. It blurs the boundaries between our inner and outer worlds and reveals a shared interdependent existence shaped by microbial life. This interwoven resilience echoes through all forms of life and every facet of society, not only revealing new solutions, but new ways of working together. These perspectives have also enriched the planetary health discourse, which initially did overlook insights from microbiology and immunology. These fields were already had already well established that microbial diversity is such a critical factor for immune resilience and ecosystem stability. And drawing on these perspectives, our network shaped the Canmore Declaration in 2018, which called attention to the interdependent vitality of natural and human-made ecosystems and how dysbiotic drift is implicated in many complex biospheric challenges, from soil systems and insect pollinators to the intestinal dysbiosis underpinning the epidemic rise in NCDs. This is now leading to more integrated cross-sectoral solutions aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, focusing on the need for ecological justice, restoration, and planetary mindsets for a fundamental reimagining of how we can relate to one another and the planet. Because at its core, our planetary crisis is a relational crisis, a breakdown in our relationships with nature, with others, and with ourselves. This is reflected in the environmental destruction, but also the escalating global conflicts and declining social cohesion. So while planetary health efforts initially heavily focused on the biophysical systems, there is now growing recognition that the threats to our biosphere are deeply entangled with threats to our psychosphere, the emotional, cultural, and psychological drivers of human behaviour. This calls for urgent, deep, structural changes in how we live, equitable well-being at every scale, personal, local, and global, requires that we address the systems of oppression, racism, classism, unnecessary wars and conflict, homelessness, mass incarcerations, and the systems that limit human flourishing. We are talking about a shift in consciousness and healing our spiritual climate. This perspective is echoed by environmental lawyer Gus Speth, who famously stated that I used to think the top global environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystems collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science, we could address these problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And while spiritual and cultural dimensions of change are still often marginalised in scientific discourse, this is beginning to change, and inner dimensions are increasingly seen as essential to the planetary health agenda. This is also evident in the increasing interest in the inner development goals, the IDGs, which emphasise the importance of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, compassion, and relational skills in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, echoing the World Health Organization's call to centre values in global health governance. The Planetary Health Alliance now places specific emphasis on spirituality, culture, and values, as you can see at that link, along with the arts and storytelling, as core to ecological well-being, belonging, and motivations for change. Initiatives such as the Constellation Project and the Earthrise community embody this focus, and I'll share more about that in a moment. Firstly, though, we must name and understand the systemic barriers, the vested interests that sustain the status quo. Among the most significant yet under-acknowledged are the commercial determinants of both human and planetary health challenges. Corporate influences driven by profit shape nearly every aspect of our lives. A glaring example is the global proliferation of ultra-processed foods, deliberately engineered for addiction and profit, despite the known harms to human and environmental health. And I'll call your attention to Matthew Robinson's amazing work on food crime. These are packed with synthetic additives that disrupt the gut microbiome, increase intestinal permeability, and are linked to metabolic disorders, neuroinflammation, and mental health problems. Even some ethical plant-based alternatives marked as sustainable are highly processed and contain problematic additives. Beyond their direct harms, corporate actors in many sectors shape research agendas, influence policy, and infiltrate public institutions, prioritising profit over well-being, eroding public trust, and obstructing systemic responses to the health crisis. And if this first barrier is driven by the pursuit of profit, the second barrier is driven by the pursuit of power. Political and ideological interests preserve their influence by manipulating the cultural narrative and cultural climate itself. Polarization, amplified by traditional and social media, has reached sectarian intensity, with narratives deliberately seeded to divide, dehumanize, and delegitimize those with differing views. Factions co-opt social and environmental agendas, turning shared concerns into battle lines. Dehumanization, judgment, and demonization, which were becoming unacceptable, are now normalized again. The result is a culture where emotional and physical health suffer, where solutions are harder to forge because trust is fractured. And these divisions are not simply about differences of opinion. They're rooted now in identity, fear, and moral concern. Fear-based motivations narrow the circle of care to familiar groups, fueling outrage and mistrust. Transformative change requires strategies that expand this circle to embrace all humanity and the natural world by shifting from fear towards love, care, and shared responsibility. Creativity, community, art, mindfulness, and nature-based practices are vital tools for cultivating this shift. And that is also why planetary health is considered as much a social movement as it is a transdisciplinary field, emphasising that solutions require new cultural paradigms rather than merely fighting against the old ones. Ultimately, deep structural changes must come through healing and reorienting cultural values. Profit and power are only symptoms of a deeper cultural shift towards materialism, consumerism, and consumption, competition, I should say. This worldview fuels scarcity mindsets and prizes extrinsic values such as wealth, status, and dominance, while diminishing intrinsic values like love, learning, growth, and care that inspire abundant mindsets. Research shows rising rates of narcissism, greed, inequality, and social fragmentation, all undermining physical and mental health. Now, our dominant culture rewards domination over collaboration, certainty over creativity, and reductionism over spirituality and love. The so-called dark triad traits of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy are disproportionately present in politics, corporation, and social media, reinforcing harmful norms and systemic injustices. However, just as our collective values have changed over time, we have the capacity to change them again. And it is now promising to see global movements seeking to encourage a culture of cooperation, compassion, and reciprocity. Decades of evidence also makes it clear that chasing extrinsic goals does not bring happiness. It only fuels an unfulfilling cycle of wanting. By contrast, happiness and meaning in life are tied to intrinsic goals across life and across cultures. They're linked to better physical, mental, and emotional health. Intrinsic values also foster collective benefits, altruism, pro-social behaviours, and pro-environmental attitudes. So encouraging these values is therefore a direct path to both personal flourishing and stronger, more collaborative communities, acting together for the well-being of people, places, and planet. Social transformation begins with connection and community. Cooperation is foundational for social transformation, but we have been conditioned to believe that evolution and progress hinge on the competitive survival of the fittest and the strongest. However, this is likely to reflect a 19th century Western worldview rather than the true nature of living systems, because nature thrives on cooperation, as do we, beginning with the oldest forms of microbial life. Cooperative networks shape the evolution of multicellular life, forming intricate communities, shared resources, and coordinating behaviour for mutual benefit. These fractal patterns reveal a central truth. Systems, biological and social, are resilient and adaptive when relationships and interactions are strong and well connected. They also remind us that even the smallest things can shape the whole. As in nature, meaningful change rarely comes from the top-down control, but from creating the conditions for emergence. System science indicates that the deepest leverage points lie not in surface interventions, but in the underlying mindsets, values, and paradigms that shape systems, beginning with our personal self-awareness, adaptability, and the capacity to transcend rigid beliefs. This shows that small, intentional actions can ignite ripples of systemic change, and building intentional relationships, critical connections formed within networks of shared purpose allows new systems to take root and spread. Strengthening these critical connections can in fact be more effective than struggling to build critical mass. So this is the essence of quantum social change. Coherence at one scale can ripple outward, producing effects far beyond our immediate actions. Each individual matters more than we think in connecting efforts to reshape and change entire systems. So that is why network building, or building networks that nurture new cultural narratives and values, is as vital as developing new technologies. Technical fixes alone cannot succeed, especially if applied with the same mindsets that created our problems in the first place: greed, self-interest, exploitation, and endless growth. As others have already noted, techno-scientific solutions need to be complemented with psychological, cultural, artistic, and spiritual dimensions of human life and its future possibilities. And many efforts are now arising to meet this challenge. And today I will briefly share the vision of the Earthrise community, which I lead, a collaboration between the Planetary Health Alliance and the Centre for Planetary Consciousness and Global Flourishing at the Nova Institute. And at its core, this is really about connecting communities, co-creating deeper narratives and communicating them widely to shape both academic thinking and broader social movements. By bringing deeper values into the mainstream conversation, we aim to accelerate this shift in consciousness needed for lasting change. So we offer a visionary space where diverse voices and traditions can advance an ethical earth-based spirituality through scholarship, art, contemplation, and dialogue. It's really rooted in the deeper spiritual relationships with ourselves, with each other, and the natural world, because we believe that emotional connection has greater power to inspire change than logic alone, and that meaningful sustainability cannot be achieved without peace, love, wisdom, respect, and forgiveness. Real transformation requires not only awareness, but also the skills and the desire to embody wiser, more compassionate ways of being. And with that in mind, I will briefly touch on the 5 themes that underpin Earthrise and our work more generally at the Centre for Planetary Consciousness. And the QR code there links to a paper that we've written recently about to summarise this. I forgot to press. Okay. So our first and central theme is co-creation and seeding new stories. Narratives shape our reality. They influence values, attitudes, and behaviors, and they have the power to shift entire systems. We are not just shaped by stories, we shape them. Yet we don't use this power consciously or creatively enough. It's not enough to dismantle old paradigms. We must also imagine and embody new ones, stories that offer hopeful visions and tangible alternatives. Too often, energy is poured into destroying the old rather than building the new. And the rising fear-based narratives are really taking a toll on mental health, especially in the younger generations. And we really have a responsibility to address this with more optimistic, mutualistic stories that offer hope, belonging, engagement, and collective action. So it really is time to extend horizons and imagine what's possible and begin living into that future now. The second theme is consciousness and inner development, deepening our self-awareness, purpose, and meaning, and cultivating the emotional resources like wisdom, love, respect, and hope that we grow from within. When we are engaged with purpose, we navigate challenges better, and this is magnified in supportive environments, which is why community development is core to our work. Which brings us to the next theme, connectedness, a universal sense of belonging and interdependence. Through deeper relationships with each other and with nature, we cultivate care, compassion, and coherence, awe and wonder, inspire emotional connections that guide us towards solutions aligned with life itself. And then we have convergence, inviting a rich tapestry of perspectives. We seek to weave scientific insight and spiritual wisdom informed by diverse ancestral and cultural worldviews. In a time of fragmentation and division, we aim to create inclusive spaces that centre shared values and a common purpose. And finally, imagination and creativity, which are essential for inspiring new paradigms. Art opens a space for intercultural and intergenerational understanding. It deepens narrative, strengthens emotional resonance, and bridges intellectual and heart-centered approaches. Obviously, these themes are all deeply interrelated, and to us, spirituality is not peripheral, but central to planetary health. And by normalizing the inclusion of these universal values in wider discussions, we can help accelerate the cultural transformation urgently needed. We, of course, are one of many groups working towards this shared purpose. And by coming together in spaces like we are here today, we can connect our efforts, amplify our impact, and build a more flourishing future together. And before I close, I just wanted to share one of the most powerful messages that I heard a few years ago at New York Climate Week in Search for Common Ground. And this was actually generated by the Yale program on climate change communication in collaboration with Potential Energy. So I'm sure that many of you already know it. They surveyed nearly 58,000 people from G20 countries, searching for a unifying message capable of mobilizing people for change, specifically climate action. What they found was simple yet profound. The most powerful motivator was love. Love for our children, love for our world, and the desire to protect it for future generations. This transcended culture, education, and political beliefs. And we shouldn't be surprised that love is a universal driving force, nor should we shy away from it. It's what we all crave. It has the power to transform everything that we do. When we center our goals in love, our collaborations deepen, our actions gain meaning and effectiveness, and our differences can become assets. In a world where vast resources are poured into war and destruction, love and peace are perhaps the most critical elements of planetary health. So one of the most vital investments we can make for our future is nurturing emotional intelligence in our children, promoting lifelong awareness of interconnectedness, love, and reverence for nature and each other to build a more compassionate, responsible culture. rooted in pro-social and pro-environmental values. And while this may seem ambitious, small intentional actions, especially within networks of shared purpose, can ignite ripples of systemic change. And as already noted, it is our efforts to build these strong, meaningful relationships that determine what really endures rather than sheer numbers. Coherent networks can create the conditions for transformative ideas to spread and new paradigms to emerge. And in that spirit, we warmly welcome all who feel called to contribute to this journey of advancing well-being for individuals, communities, and this world that we share. So please reach out to me if you would like to join us. So I will end on a personal note of love and joy and gratitude for this opportunity to share for all of you and for this incredible world that we live in. None of this is new. We are and always have been inherently part of the universe, but in choosing to live in that awareness, in our actions, in our collaboration, in our daily lives, we can shift what is possible for our shared future. So thank you. I will leave it there, but please reach out if you would like to be part of our community. And I also invite you to our next virtual event in December, which is all about cultivating connections and transforming our world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Prescott, for guiding us through your beautiful artistic expressions. And just like Dr. Prescott said, just keep in mind, we've got a ton of them blown up big size all the way inside the reception hall shortly, which you'll hear quote. At this moment, we're going to take a break. We're going to welcome you all back at 4 o'clock. I want to make sure that you all are aware bathrooms are right as soon as you leave this. You'll have a bathroom for men if you identify with men on this side and women on this side. If these get too filled, there's also bathrooms over there. We also have refreshments outside if you want to drink and stuff, but please keep in mind, no refreshments inside in here. Awesome. Thank you all. We will welcome you back at 4.
Come back, please. Let's all move to the middle section. That would be great. Okay, thank you, thank you.
Very unique.
Is it Soul's time? Most spontaneous thing you got.
know it, I know it, I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay.
You go.
Take that down.
Yeah. Medicinal chair.
There's sometimes they have like.
Got it.
Even
But
though
nothing.
that's
Maybe get something to drink.
Thin.
Yes.
He was on it.
He was here before Jordan.
Oldest is getting the clothes. Oh. And it's magic on the background. Oh. Those are called.
Just the audio. Video. Right.
And there was a lot of it right now. Yes.
I'll probably cut it.
That's who. Oh, okay.
There's the camera. We know her now. Not one on.
I mean, I can see it screen there on the.
But like, where's the? It's coming up again, it's smoky.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's always so good.
This isn't too long.
No, it's not. No, I mean, if you feel it was long, none of them, none of us in the audience. I'm gonna- oh,
Right under.
No.
It's
But it has smoothie though,
Oh,
right?
yes, it did. No, it was fine. Yeah.
So
So easy. Yeah, he was great. I was getting my laptop out of the way.
You don't want them to flowing in Long Island sound. I don't know. I just think there's no support. So it just has no. Let's see what I'm gonna advocate for empowering people to. That was, we did, you know, maybe. That was gonna be my angle to read. The butts. It was a cigarette butt, we collected cigarette butts. The bulldog butts, yes. I picked, but then I saved that, but then it got like, it was completely.
Trying to sit in the middle. Yes, thank you. So perfect. In the middle. Yes, in this sense.
My son is buying his first car. My husband's like, are you gonna meet us? And I feel a little bit guilty now. Hey, I'm gonna have. They're meeting. Buying it in Bristol. You're gonna be. I wanna see you.
Yeah, but no.
That story.
That's.
That was a-
Hello. For you.
Right.
I'm having.
Or Matt.
Yes, good point.
Safe, I thought saying that. So.
That's really interesting. I have that sound. Thank you so much for your talk. It's really wonderful. Yeah, it's so inspiring. Your artwork is just gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
I teach in the theater, dance and performance
Oh, do
studies
you?
department
Yeah.
here at Yale. I mean, not here. but
Yeah,
like,
you're
you know.
you're down.
Yeah, downtown
Yeah,
area,
yeah.
exactly. And I've been doing research recently on theater and various forms of therapy.
I like, oh my.
Following her in particular,
yeah.
but she was and towards the end of that, it's like turning towards like
So.
you know, the healing of much larger bodies than
Yes.
you know, the trauma
Yes.
and how the two like you know
It's
the
all.
two things are so
Yeah.
interrelated as both of
Exactly.
the talks were saying.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I was just so profoundly moved by the way in which you were putting
Is she still in that?
all of the
Yeah.
the logic and the emotion and the you know
I went, she brought me in.
beautiful writer and beautiful painter and I can only imagine how
To the whole staff.
pediatrician you are. I have two kids and I'm like, that's the pediatrician I want to be taken into. It's awesome.
Thanks.
My son is turning 12 today.
Okay.
Yeah, and my daughter's 9.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
yeah,
Good.
and she in particular is like really, she's a total environmentalist. You know, and is
I really have a lot of hope for the next generation. so much more aware and tuned in some ways than they're
Yeah.
connected to their tablets, unfortunately.
Right, I
But
mean,
at
it
the
goes
same-
in both directions,
does.
actually, in some
Yeah.
ways, you know,
mean,
and, yeah, I mean, I was mentally being like committing to, okay, I need to find a summer camp where, like, for my son in particular, who has just, he's gotten hooked recently, just because all of his friends are spending time online. You know, and, but also the like, and then just the way in which we frame narratives
Really?
is so,
Yeah.
so important. That's
And
like
you don't
actually
realize
such a
you're
huge
doing it.
part of it.
Mm.
Yeah, because I can see, like, I mean, my daughter she's very, very emotionally sensitive and is just, I mean, I can see her like feeling crushed by the fear-based narratives, even, you know, though it's motivating, but it actually is very problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all
Yeah.
for the elders to be
Yeah,
putting that
It is.
picture on the people who
Right.
are hopefully going to solve that problem.
I mean, it doesn't
We're not
really
doing
work
it.
for like getting them to do their homework or for saving the planet. You know what I mean? Like, if you don't do this, you're gonna fail. If we don't do this, we're gonna die. You know, I mean, like, it actually doesn't, it's not
It does.
holistically
They're trying-
motivating.
Yeah.
If we're talking about intrinsic values. Yeah, yeah, that's, anyway, I just really so
What
difficult.
was your name to me?
Elisa Morrison. Oh, my name tags on my
Yeah.
jacket, but I actually wanted to, we've changed our department name now to theater, dance and performance studies, but it's an old one. But my email's on there and I'm gonna write to you also, because I really love this, especially as my research and just living work is continuing. I would really love to be in touch with you. And
I mean, I live.
took
I live
note of the
here now. So
Oh, do you?
mostly we in the New York City area, so it's
Wow.
kind of actually.
So is Nova based in?
No, it's in Baltimore, but
Okay.
I married a New Yorker and yeah, we kind of tell it
Oh,
everyone
right.
else.
Yeah, right. So you're like,
Yeah.
get up in the middle of the night, get on your Zooms to Australia. Yeah.
Fortunately, most of my academia is based in this time zone or Europe,
Okay.
so it's.
Yeah. Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I lived in Australia as a child.
too.
I always just have.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Sure, everybody kind of gets to the seat. I love that everybody has shifted to the middle, but I love that people went to the back in the middle. So if I want to go a little bit closer. We're all going to have a moderated session where you're going to have the opportunity to ask questions to our speakers. So I want to make sure I can see you all too back in the background. So if y'all want to move kind of upwards, we'll kind of make our way through here. Alrighty, y'all. As people kind of make their way back, I am really excited to welcome you all back to Imagining a Healthier Planet, the Power of Creative Expression and Collective Healing. Delighted to introduce Dr. A.Z.A. Alsup. So Dr. A.Z.A. Alsup is a psychiatrist, neuroscientist, and neofusion artist whose work bridges science, medicine, and music. His research explores social cognition, mindfulness, and psychedelics as pathways to collective healing, while his music, which is rooted in the traditions of the African diaspora, blends jazz, gospel, hip-hop, and soul. He studied biology, jazz, and philosophy at North Carolina Central University, trained in the Harvard MIT PhD program, and was an Emerson Scholar at Berklee College of Music. After completing psychiatric training at Yale, he became an assistant professor at both Yale and Howard University and serves as the director of the Center for Collective Healing. He is also the medical director of the Rest Crisis Center and co-founder of organizations uniting art, science, spirituality, and community building to drive social change. As a performer, he has appeared at various venues, including the Kennedy Center, Jazz at Lincoln Center, South by Southwest or SXSW, and Yale's Schwartzman Center. So without further ado, I introduce Dr. A.Z.A.
I'm really excited to be able to speak with you all on some of the work that we've been doing, share some ideas, get some feedback, and just build bridges. We're going to talk about decoding and modulating collective action through the lens of music, mindfulness, and psychedelics. And I like to start with a land acknowledgement because I think, I'm going to share a lot of data and things I'm really excited about. It's also important to understand that the infrastructure that we have, the ability to do these things came at a high cost and a violent, history and pain. And I think it's very fitting in thinking about the current state of the planet. Like, how do we treat the land and how do we acknowledge where we have been and where we would like to go? And then I have conflict of interest with two companies that I co-founded that work at the intersection of art, science, and community building. So I'll start with just talking about this idea of developing tools for social connection, why that is important, and then talk about the development of community-based therapeutics and the way that we're approaching that in the lab. And then lastly, talk about studying and driving community-based climate action. So starting with developing tools for social connection, right? We start with a very basic premise, which is that the social brain is critical for all of our social norms and culture. And there are these aspects of the brain that are really important for driving that. Likewise, maybe I'll move here because it's not being as responsive as I'd like it to be. In the sort of wake of COVID-19, I think it's no longer something I have to convince people of, that social connection is really important. In fact, it can be as dangerous as smoking cigarettes. And specifically in the context of our conversation today, we know that social solutions are really going to be important for solving some of the existential crises that we face that are really necessary to our survival as a species. But even more than that, as a clinician, we see this idea that altered social connection and cognition are seen across many different clinical scenarios, and there's still no FDA-approved treatment within the social domain specifically. So here's just an example of a number of different conditions that we see in the hospital, both in psychiatry and neurology, in which social connection and social cognition is disrupted. And our simple argument is that anything that's going to be really successful in bridging the gap and solving these problems has to be affordable, accessible, implementable, and community-based. And music really fits all of those in a very profound way. But in fact, when we look back in history, music has always been really intrinsic to all of our first initial healing systems. And it was only with changes in the way that we approached music where it became something that was an art form and separate from just generally lived life and seen as something that wasn't medicine. But when we look across the globe, we see that music is universal in virtually all of the cultures that we've been able to study. And while there's certainly cultural nuance and cultural shaping of musical preferences and even musical expression, everywhere where we find music, we find these certain universals. And one of those is that it's always within a social, ritualistic context. It's always a way of communicating and bringing people together. And people have studied this in more kind of controlled experimental conditions. This is one experiment I like, in which they bring children into the lab and have them do an exercise that's either musically primed, where they're singing a song and playing with instruments, or non-musically primed, where they're interacting and there's still motion, but it's not set to music. And then they ask them to play with each other. But one of them has a broken toy, the one in the red. So as soon as they try to play with it, it's going to fall apart. And they measure how likely is it for the other child to actually help the one who has a broken toy. And as you can see, in the musical priming condition, you get significantly more helping than in the non-musical priming condition. It's statistically significant. And there's been a lot of work now to show that music is actually one of the most potent stimulators of neural activity in the brain. And this was sort of alluded to by the dean, right? Where you get this widespread network of brain regions that are being activated by music. And we've known since the 70s that music therapy in a very specific psychiatric context can be helpful in bridging interpersonal dynamics compared to non-musical activities, and that it can alleviate symptoms of mild and moderate depression, as well as anxiety. And there have been now a number of meta-analyses that bear that out. And so the approach we take at the Center for Collective Healing is to bridge this gap between academia and community, bringing them together in a network to ask, how can we better understand tools like music to solve a few major problems? Today, we're going to focus on the work that we're doing around climate and nature relatedness and this idea of coordination and problem solving. And you can just see that there are a number of different partners that we work with to achieve these goals. And I'll talk about some of that work today. And so we use multiple modalities to study these. Multimodal languages, these are things like music, visual arts, dance, theater, but also immersive technologies and experiences and alternative therapies and plant medicines and psychedelics, fit within that purview. But obviously, things like traditional therapy, CBT, your SSRIs, all those things also can play a role. And so I'll start by talking about this idea that we can develop therapeutics that are community-based and are in the community, don't require people to have to come into the hospital in order to receive treatment. And one of the models that we use is this idea of music mindfulness. And this combines elements of music with mindfulness activities. I've already kind of shared this idea that music can alleviate symptoms of stress, anxiety, and depression. It can enhance pro-social behavior and activate certain regions of the brain that are important in psychiatry and mental health, like the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC, and the amygdala. But importantly, it can also be a preferred and effective support for meditation and mindfulness, particularly in individuals who don't already have a practice. And there's been also a lot of literature to show that mindfulness has its own effects separately on things like mood and can reduce stress. And we know now that online interventions can be effective for stress reduction and enhancing mood. And it also can activate these same regions in the brain. And so we think that there's this synergistic effect that we can have when we combine these two non-pharmacological community-based interventions. I show this to just illustrate this idea that there's been a history in which mindfulness practices were developed within very spiritual, cultural contexts. And within mainstream medicine, there's always been this kind of, mindfulness like a woo-woo sort of thing, but it actually really acts on very distinct regions of the brain that are specifically important in the types of things that we care about in psychiatry. And this is both at a structural level. So long-term meditators have changes in the actual structure of these brain regions and networks, but also from a functional perspective. And so this just illustrates some of those networks that are really important. And again, the types of things that they're important for are exactly the things we think about in psychiatry, things like attention and emotional regulation, regulation of arousal, interoception, even sensory processing. And I won't belabor this point, but it's just to show that there are now many meta-analyses that have shown that various forms of music therapy can be effective for things like anxiety. But I will point out that it's not equivocal, right? So there's some that seem to do very well, but then there are also some that don't work as well. And so really starting to understand why they work when they work and why they don't will be important in these becoming mainstream and in our vision, first-line therapies for mood disorders. This is another example showing, mindfulness for anxiety is better than control in these meta-analyses. But again, some of these formats are not as effective as others. And so in our study, the music mindfulness study, what we did was say we want to look at individuals in the community that have anxiety and depression and put them through a music mindfulness protocol where they will come to the Bloom Center, which is a community center here in New Haven. And we partnered with the New Haven Symphony Orchestra to supply musicians. And we had people come in and engage in music mindfulness while we record heart rate variability and EEG activity as a way of not only asking, can this actually help alleviate psychological distress in individuals in the community who have moderate to severe symptoms of anxiety and depression? Well, what might be the biological mechanism through which this works? We were really excited because this was also the first published bilingual version of this study, and I'll give you a sense of what that was like. So here's our setup. This is Bloom Community Center. I don't know if anyone's ever been there, but it's it's a very beautiful space. They sell flowers. They do all kinds of really cool community engaged events. And we had a very kind of sophisticated audio setup so that we can make sure across all our different sessions, we were always playing the music at the same volume with the same frequencies. And we also live streamed this to a separate group of individuals so that we could look at the impact of in-person sessions versus virtual sessions. So I'm going to play a short snippet of what this looked like. We have a mindfulness instructor here and our musician from the New Haven Symphony Orchestra, and you'll get a sense of what the participants were going through. Feel free to, drop in if you like, or you can just kind of observe.
Begin to move that awareness of the breath just to the belly. As you breathe in, notice how the belly expands and lifts. And as you breathe out, notice how the belly softens and releases. See if you can just keep the focus of your awareness right here. The rise and the fall of the belly as you breathe in and as you breathe out. Comienza a mover su atención hacia el estómago. Mientras inhala, notando el estómago expandiéndose y elevándose. Y mientras exhala, note cómo el estómago se relaja y baja. Trate de enfocarse aquí por unos momentos, con el movimiento del estómago expandiéndose y relajándose con cada respiración. And once more, beginning to move your awareness back up to your nostrils, being with the sensation of the breath entering and exiting the nose. Noticing.
All right, so that's this example of part of a session. The sessions were an hour long with different components, which I'll describe. So we initially got about 160 people from the community, screened some of them, and then enrolled eventually 22 in the live group and 16 in the virtual group for this pilot study. And this just gives you a sense of our demographics. One of the things that we were able to do was really to recruit and enroll a really diverse set of participants, which is often a struggle within clinical spaces. But again, we took a very intentional approach in how we engaged the community. And so in this trial, people did two kinds of meditation over the course of 2 weeks. One was a focus-based meditation where which was an example of what you heard, where they were instructed to direct their attention and focus on different aspects of breath or the body or music, and then a motivational meditation, which was more based around open awareness, cognitive restructuring, and reframing. And then whatever they did on week 1, they did the opposite on week 2. And we also compared them doing this activity with music versus without music so that we, again, could start to get a sense of what might be the mechanistic differences. And so what I'm showing you here first is that when we look at heart rate variability, these are 2 different measures or 3 different measures of heart rate variability. And you'll see across all of these, we see that these increases in some were just within 5 minutes and others after 10 minutes, where we are showing that we can actually acutely shift this autonomic activity measured by heart rate variability. And this suggests to us that we're engaging parasympathetic activity in the body. And so to take you back to maybe undergrad biology, or, there's a lot of nurses here, so y'all will be familiar with this, but this idea that the autonomic nervous system has two branches. The sympathetic is sort of the fight and flight, parasympathetic is rest and digest. And in a simple model of this, which says that your body is in one state or the other, and if you're in sympathetic for too long or in a chronic way, that it can have really devastating effects on physical and mental health. Now, in reality, these two systems are always engaged to some degree and actually are in balance with each other. But this idea is that if we can drive parasympathetic activity in this condition, this might be really helpful for treating these symptoms of anxiety and depression. And when we look at our EEG activity, what I want you to see is that when people are in this mindfulness activity with music versus without music, there are some similarities in terms of the network engagement, and there are also some differences. So with music, for instance, you get this frontal activity that you don't get in the no music condition. Or in no music, you get this temporal activity that you don't get in the music condition. But when it comes to the beta and gamma frequency range, you see pretty equivalent activity in this temporal region. So we can show here that we are engaging these frontal temporal regions of the brain when people are engaged in this activity. What most important for us was, especially at this level, was are we having some impact on their psychology? And so we had a number of different psychometric measures that we looked at. And this is in the live context. So the first one is subjective units of distress. And you can see that in both the focus and motivation meditations, we get decreases after just this one session of music mindfulness, but nothing in perceived stress, which is sort of a more long-term measure. When we look at state mindfulness, we can show that we are actually engaging them in a mindful state and being able to enhance it after this session compared to before. And when we look at altered states of consciousness, we can show that we are able to engage an altered state of consciousness while individuals are engaged in this activity. Importantly, when we look at social connectedness, we also are able to enhance social connection after individuals are engaged in just one of these sessions. Interestingly, I'm not showing the data here, but when we look at the virtual version of this, we also saw decreases in distress, enhancement in mindfulness, and enhancement in altered states of consciousness, but no enhancement in social connection, right? Which suggests that being in person in the group and doing this is really critical to being able to enhance this feeling of social connection. And you don't get it in a live stream, even if you have a chat and things like that, that might allow people to interact with each other. Okay, so in this study, we show that we can acutely elevate parasympathetic and sympathetic activity during music mindfulness. We can activate frontotemporal activity in the brain. We can improve social connection, stress, and mindfulness. And so we think this may be an effective community-based treatment for mood disorders. And so we're now in the process of designing and fundraising for an 8-week feasibility clinical trial where we look at, can we actually use this in the community if individuals engage in this for 8 weeks or 12 weeks to significantly treat symptoms of anxiety and depression. For those of you who may be familiar, when we give someone an SSRI, it can take up to 6 weeks to actually work. So could this be sort of a bridge when someone is diagnosed and is going to be started on treatment where they can start and actually start to have symptom relief before they even start the SSRIs? Or in our goal, really, can this become a first-line treatment, right? There's no side effects that we were able to detect in this initial pilot. Could this become a non-pharmacological first-line treatment for anxiety or depression? We think it can, and we are in the process of trying to build the evidence to prove so. Another model that we look at when we think about community-based forms of treatment is the drum circle. And so we have a drum circle study that we do both here in New Haven as well as in DC. We get, again, members from the community with symptoms of anxiety and depression to join the drum circle. And why drum circles? Drumming has had a long historical role in as a form of communication in social settings. We know group drumming can impact stress and promote connection and relationship and fosters communal experiences. We think through synchronizing things like emotions. And we think that collective music making can bolster social emotional behavior and behavioral synchrony, which might be important for things like cooperation and social attachment. And so in this study, people come in, they do some pre-surveys. There's a check-in where everyone says, how they're feeling in that moment. They do a brief breathing exercise, and then they drum for 45 minutes. There's another check-in, and then they undergo, they do another set of surveys where, again, we're looking at these things like distress, perceived stress, Here we added another measurement of state anxiety, so we could start to look more directly at potential treatment for anxiety and then altered states of consciousness. So this gives you an example of one of our community sites in DC, where individuals were engaged in our drum circle. And so one of the things that we found was that during the drum circle, there are periods of both synchrony as well as asynchrony. I'm going to play two examples for you, and you all can guess which one you think is the synchronous, which one you think is the asynchronous. So here's the first example. All right, that's example one. This is example two. All right, so which one was the synchronous one, first or second? Second. Okay, we have some first. We have more seconds that I heard. So the second one was the more synchronous one, and it turns out we did a separate study. I'm not showing the data here, but people are generally very good at being able to tell which ones are synchronous and which ones are asynchronous. And there's a strong correlation between the ones, people rate a strong correlation between higher synchrony, what they judge as being synchronous, and what they judge as being more socially connected. And I just show this here to show that we can actually sort of statistically measure and determine what is synchronous and asynchronous. And so you can see sort of in the asynchronous, you have all these different beats showing up on a beat histogram, whereas when it's synchronous, you kind of converge on a more specific beat. So we had different versions of this study. In one version, we followed a group of drum circles over the course of 8 weeks. And when we do that, we see this shift in the beat dynamics, so the proportion of beats per minute. It can be seen a little more clearly here, where in week 1, you're looking at the red distribution. Week 3 is the yellow distribution, and by week 8, it's the blue distribution. And so generally over time, the group is becoming not only more synchronous, but they're also playing at faster beats. And so we're really interested in sort of following these dynamics and the ways in which the drum circle synchrony and asynchrony evolves, how that might be a marker of social dynamics and social connections. But importantly, one of the things that we did is while individuals were in the drum circle, we measured, again, their heart rate to ask how are we actually engaging physiology in ways that might explain some of the effects that we see during the drum circle. So here I'm showing you, again, 2 measurements of heart rate variability. And I'll kind of just walk you through these different portions of the drum circle. So the control period is in the beginning of the drum circle, where the facilitator is sort of explaining what they're going to do. People are sort of playing the drums, but they've started the session, but there's still sort of an intro to what they're going to be doing, and people are getting familiar with the drums. In melody 1, the teacher teaches them a very specific beat, and everyone is sort of learning and playing that beat. In synchrony, everyone is playing together at the same time, the same beat. Then they go through a period where they gradually start to increase the tempo of that beat. Then they go through a rhythm change where the facilitator will play one rhythm for a minute and then change to another rhythm for another minute and then go back and forth, and then teaches them another melody. And what you can see here is that as individuals are engaging in the drum circle, you see these really dramatic and significant shifts in heart rate variability while they engage in the drum circle. So we are really engaging the autonomic nervous system and the physiology in a really profound way. But again, more importantly, when we look at the psychometrics, when we look at altered states of consciousness, we see that they increase. This is after one drum circle session. When we look at distress, we see it acutely decreases. When we look at state anxiety, again, it acutely decreases. And when we look at perceived stress in this condition, in this group of circles, it actually did decrease right after. And so we have a signal here that not only are we engaging the physiology of the autonomic nervous system in a way that might be therapeutic, but just participating in one of these circles, people who are coming in with symptoms of anxiety and depression are feeling less distress and less state anxiety. And so what was really cool about this is that there was also a positive correlation between how much the heart rate variability changed to how much their state anxiety was reduced. So the more that individuals had a change in that heart rate variability during the drum circle, the less anxious they felt, after. And so we think this might be a plausible biological mechanism by which participating in the drum circle may be able to be a treatment for anxiety. So again, we look at the drum circle as a model that we can use to track this idea of synchrony and asynchrony, and this being one output or one measure of group dynamics and social connection within a group. We can acutely modulate both parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system activity measured by heart rate variability within one drum circle session. And we can see that we can track this also over 8 weeks. Participating in one circle can reduce anxiety and distress while increasing altered states of consciousness. There's a whole literature as well about how altered states of consciousness in and of themselves might have intrinsic therapeutic value, particularly within a therapeutic context. And so again, we think this may be an effective community-based treatment for anxiety. And we really recently, along with two of my colleagues, got a U24 grant to explore the feasibility of this sort of model for treatment of pain and anxiety in individuals with dementia. And again, our goal long-term as a lab is to prove these out as a potential first-line therapy for individuals with moderate and severe anxiety and depression in the community, with the idea that this might be a way to prevent individuals from having to be hospitalized or to take on a pharmacological burden that comes with side effects and issues with non-adherence. Okay, so part of our goal in studying these different social dynamics and these different community-based forms of interaction is not only to treat mental health symptoms, but to ask how can we use this to coordinate collective action to achieve a number of different ends, one of them being climate action. And so one of our partners, which is Beckley Retreats, does legal psilocybin retreats in both Jamaica and the Netherlands. And so just to give you a sense of what that program looks like, there's a 4-week preparation session. All of that is virtual, where individuals are taught some of the background about psychedelics, in this case, psilocybin specifically, are led in different mindfulness activities to prepare. They set intentions, and then they travel to either Jamaica or the Netherlands. I recommend Jamaica. For 6 days, where they will undergo 2 high-dose psilocybin experiences. And there's yoga, breathwork, meditation, other things that are sort of integrated into that experience. And then after that, they again go through 6 weeks of integration, where they have group sessions, are led through different mindfulness activities. And so one of the things that we thought is that this might be the type of experience that could engage individuals to be more involved with climate action and to enhance nature relatedness. Both retreat settings are within a very beautiful natural landscape. And there's this idea that psilocybin can induce sort of greater sense of nature relatedness. And so we performed a pilot study where we went down to Jamaica to do some data collection in a group of individuals that were participating in this retreat. And we looked at things like social perception using a protocol we developed, which I'll explain to you. Looked at nature relatedness, things like state anxiety, connectedness, and distress. And so the social perception assay is a way of, within a group, looking at these unspoken impression formations that are happening as people are interacting in a group. So let's say in a group of 8 people, you have them basically lined up across from each other, and they will rate each other on a few different dimensions, which I will show you. After they've done one round of that, they kind of go to the next round. Then the next round is sort of like a speed dating format, so that every individual is able to rate every other individual on these dimensions. And these are the questions that we ask. How connected do you feel to this partner? How approachable do you think this person is? How likely is this person to be in your socioeconomic class? How likely is this person to share your political views? How willing are you to discuss a controversial subject with this partner? And how willing are you to compromise to solve a complex problem with this partner? It's on a Likert scale of 1 to 7. And so what we can get are these network graphs. So there are 2 dimensions of information that I want you to pay attention to. So the first is the circle. Each circle is an individual within that network. And then the color of the circle tells you what their nature relatedness score is. And then the lines between each participant is the average of their connectedness their connection score to each other. So what you can see here is that there's a pretty profound enhancement of connection between all individuals in this network after these 2 group psilocybin experiences. another thing I'll point out is that in individuals who are coming in with a lower nature relatedness score, we can see that we're able to see an enhancement of that nature relatedness score. Now, obviously, in individuals who are already coming in with a high, nature relatedness score, which maybe a few people who want to do psilocybin in Jamaica, they might already have a high sense of nature relatedness. So those individuals, there's not much movement there because they're already coming in sort of with a ceiling effect. This is an example of another network where, again, you can see these really, profound enhancements in connection between individuals in the group. And again, some changes in nature relatedness across the two sessions. So one of the things that we saw is when we looked at the correlation between individuals' ratings for each other over the two group sessions, we get an enhancement in the correlation and an increase in the connectedness ratings. Now, when we look at the different psychometrics, although we didn't see any differences in state anxiety, this is good because I think one of the hesitations about doing group-based psilocybin work in the US, particularly in a clinical context, is this idea that it might lead to more harmful experiences, or people might be more anxious to be in a group of people. So we don't see that here. When we measured connectedness and nature relatedness, again, we didn't see any significant differences. Part of the reason for that is that many of these individuals are already coming in with a high sense of connectedness and nature relatedness. But when we look at sort of acute distress, we do see a significant decrease, although again, individuals aren't coming into this setting with high levels of distress because in this context, they wouldn't be eligible to participate. But I think this is a great pilot to give us this idea that, one, not only are we able to very significantly drive connection in a group of strangers in this sort of psilocybin retreat format, but we can acutely decrease distress, and we can potentially, in individuals who are coming in with low nature relatedness, enhance nature relatedness. We've also been able to collaborate with another great researcher, Leo Roseman, who has been engaged in this very powerful work where they take individuals with Israeli and Palestinian backgrounds and get them together to do ceremonies with ayahuasca, and have been able to show very powerful community building in bringing these individuals together. And so building on this model, the idea was, can we now also bring individuals together with the explicit idea that they will then take this set of experiences and use it to facilitate greater community-based climate action. And so this is the Reworlding Fellowship Project. It's an 8-month project where people are exposed to different climate data, they read books on climate change, but then within that framework, they are going to engage in a week and a half long experience of psychedelics, both with ayahuasca and with psilocybin. And the question is, how does that experience within this container potentially lead to enhancing the ways that they can influence their community to engage in collective climate action? And so we were able to, they've already run a few cohorts of individuals through this project. And they took 30 people and did an in-depth interview with them about this experience. And in our lab, we developed an unbiased LLM approach for doing this thematic analysis to ask, what are the core themes that come out of this kind of experience? This LLM approach was designed by Nilesh, who's actually here with us. And so you take 6 independent runs of all of the data that we have from the transcript and ask, what are the core themes that cut across all of these different experiences? And so I like to share some of these themes with you because I think they are pretty powerful. So overall, there's this idea of surrender and acceptance and transcendent reframing of trauma. But when you dig more into sort of some of the specific themes, we have this idea of embodied purpose and labor. So not just the sense of mission and commitment that is cognitive, but it's felt as a very sort of embodied sense of embodied reality towards a certain sense of mission and commitment around climate action. Then this idea of Earth as a living entity, which is this profound direct connection of Earth as having its own consciousness, having a sense of its own perspective, history, and life force, which can be a fundamental reframing of how people view the planet that we're on. Then there's this idea of human connection as an anchor, right? People see others as a sense of stability against overwhelming energetic experiences, again, which goes against some of, I think, the fears within the US medical establishment about doing some of this group work with psychedelics. then this idea of profound reverence and humility towards not just each other, but towards nature. And one of the participants specifically had this really deep connection with a palm tree. And this idea of the interconnectedness of life itself, which again can be an idea, but can also be very transformative when it becomes an embodied sort of sense of reality. This idea of mystical union and belonging, this idea again of connection with nature, again, and a collective energy or even connectedness to another person. And then lastly, this idea of spiritual reframing of trauma, where an event becomes not just a senseless tragedy, but a profound, although difficult to understand, purpose and sacrifice, and seeing sort of perpetrators as not just purely malicious, but somehow having to fulfill a difficult role within this bigger purpose. And it's important to know that this comes with both a mix of clarity, but also a real sense of disturbance afterwards, right? Because the trauma is still painful and it still doesn't feel good. And so reconciling those things, I think, can be challenging. And so we're really interested in sort of furthering this model as a way of, again, galvanizing communities towards better and more impactful climate action. And so the last thing I'll share is this idea of how can we use AI as a solution for community-based climate action. Now, this, I think, I still have mixed feelings about. Like, I don't know if the potential benefits outweigh the costs, right, to the environment, to energy, et cetera. But it's something that we're exploring to see if the benefits may be there. And obviously, we know climate information is everywhere, but collective action is hard. So can we leverage this idea that AI can come up with really good solutions and make them very implementable? And people are already using things like ChatGPT to ask and answer so many different questions. Can we leverage it to specifically help people to solve climate crises within their local community settings? So just giving you a little bit of a sense of the background, we're able to have a model that we can train on climate data from both local spaces like Connecticut, but then we can also embed community-based data about how social groups function. We can embed data from our own experiments, like I mentioned with the reworlding experiment, the experiment that we're doing with Beckley, and then ask, can we fine-tune a model that's specifically trained to come up with community-based climate actions? This just gives you a sense of it. Obviously, you want to be able to do green computing, do things like privacy and security checks, but eventually you want something that functions like ChatGPT, but is better and more finely tuned to actually take climate data and community social data to come up with community action. And this is just sort of a tester phase model for what this looks like and the ways that people might be able to leverage it. And we're excited about then being able to come up with solutions, test them in the community and see, do they actually work, right? If those community-based solutions that are generated actually can show impact, then maybe this is a viable path forward to coming up with community-based solutions. So the last thing I'll share is sort of my artistic project, Music for the Collective, which we launched this year at the Kennedy Center and since have performed it at a number of different places, which is really our attempt to say, yes, it's going to take us a few years to like do the feasibility clinical trial and then do the phase 1 and then do the phase 2 and phase 3. But we already believe that this works. Can we just start to do it in the community and make it directly accessible? And so I'll just share sort of a snippet from the latest event that we did at the National Academy of Sciences and some of the impact that we're having there.
Music, art, health, cultural programs of the National Academy of Sciences and LabX curated an afternoon where sound became a conduit for connection. Music for the Collective was a collaborative event bringing art, culture, and healing together through the transformative sounds of the Dr. AZA Trio.
Yeah. Back to the top. The question has an answer. And then the answer this intersection between music and art. Throughout my career, it always felt like two very separate paths. There was me as the scientist, biology major, taking those classes. Then there was me as the musician in jazz studies, doing jazz combo. But those things didn't really integrate for me. And it was actually a big point of tension intrinsically, because I felt like there was a way for this to connect, but there weren't many pathways in my training to do that. And so as I actually became a psychiatrist and got into residency was when I started to really see that there was this really powerful space to bring music and the arts into healing. Everything that we did today was evidence-based. Right? We've done studies in our lab to show that playing music together, playing percussions together, synchronizes heart rhythms, increases parasympathetic activity. That's the part of the body that helps us to rest. The music mindfulness exercise that we did, right, also increases autonomic nervous system activity in a way that promotes healing and promotes rest. There are all these formulas that music in the popular realm use a lot. Like this is a very common one in jazz. So 2-5-1. And one of the things we found in our lab, for instance, is that chord progression specifically activates certain neural networks in the brain that are important for social networking. It's important for connecting, the way that people pay attention to certain cues. Yet still, we know that social connection is actually vital to our health. It can be as dangerous as smoking cigarettes to be socially isolated. And in mental health, no matter what the diagnosis is, pretty much all symptoms become worse if someone is socially isolated. I've learned that love requires vulnerability, and the scariness that comes with it is a part of that process. It's like there's an element of surrender that we have to partake in order to receive love and in order to give love. And when we can learn to do that, it can really free us up to connect in a deeper way.
Music is not just art and not just science. It is a bridge. It works on the body, the mind, the brain, and the spirit. It fosters individual healing, strengthens community bonds, and even powers social movements. By integrating science and music, we don't just study health, we create it.
And we'd like to let you all know that the next installment will be here again in New Haven on October 31st at Firehouse Cove Studios. So feel free to visit their website and come out and support. It will be an amazing healing time. And so with that, I want to acknowledge all the amazing people in my lab that contributed to this work, and different collaborators and mentors at various institutions, as well as my funding sources. So thank you.
Oh. Like, where'd the mic go? Great to see y'all. What'd y'all think? Very interesting, fascinating, right? So very kind of applause again for Dr. AZA. Just to let you all know, right after this, we'll have the reception. You all will be blessed by the hands of Dr. AZA as plays the piano. So we're really grateful to have him with us. So really, really thankful. Our next speaker is Dr. Moira Fradinger, who's a professor of comparative literature at Yale University. Before academia, she served as a clinical psychoanalyst and governmental gender policy maker. At Yale, she teaches 20th century European and Latin American film, literature, and political thought, as well as critical theory, psychoanalysis, and medical humanities. She is the author of Binding Violence, Literary Visions of Political Origins, also Antigonas, Writing from Latin America, which won the 2024 Renee Welleck Prize by the American Comparative Literature Association, and the forthcoming Antigonas, a translated anthology of 7 Latin American plays, including Antigone plays in Spanish, Portuguese, and Haitian Creole. Her current projects are on Latin America, Third Cinema, Gender Debates in Argentina, Psychoanalysis and Capitalism and the Politics of Sleep. She is also writing her own memoir on insomnia. In her 15-minute segment, Dr. Fadinger will frame 3 reflective questions that invite deeper engagement with the themes presented by our speakers in the preceding speaker presentations. These questions serve as thoughtful pathways to uphold and operationalize the integration of humanities as well as sciences. Without further ado, I want to first welcome our speakers to the stage, and then I will welcome Dr. Fadinger. Speakers, you have water in case you need it too, also on the side. The microphone should be on. Beautiful. Dr. Fadinger, happy to welcome you up to the stage.
Easy, I want to go to Jamaica. What can I do? I mean, I can show you my diagnosis of anxiety. Insomnia, I can give you insomnia. How can you get me there? Thank you so much. Before starting formally, I do want to say that I was struck by the very beginning of this afternoon with music, and the very ending of this afternoon with music. The very beginning of this afternoon was the personal story of the Dean of the School of Nursing, a very moving story with which I relate very profoundly because of my father's health currently. And the very end was with your performance, AZA. What is interesting for me is that from the point of view of my field, what we are studying, what matters to us is what kind of music, because the School of Nursing dean said very clearly, my father came alive when he was listening to certain type of music, not any kind of music. Do you hear me well? Yes. I want to keep in mind that these phrases were pronounced and in very different ways. Art is medicine. Music can make a person come alive. We share a common ground. We fear the extinction of our experience. We need to shift from fear to love. We have a social brain. And music can be a first-line treatment. That you sold me. I'm totally into this. So allow me to read. English is not my native language, so I will read 4 pages about our perspective, what we do from the field of what I call the human sciences. In the Anglosphere, we call that the humanities. The sphere where I come from, we call them human sciences. And then I want to open to the panelists with 3 basic questions that maybe can start the conversation. So allow me also first to express my gratitude to Asia and her team for the invitation to this wonderful event, and to the 3 speakers for their inspiring, and I would say hopeful approach toward what I believe is crucial for our future, finding alliances between the human sciences, the natural sciences, and artistic practitioners, especially important for those whose transformative practice falls on the survival of all living systems with which human animals share a home, this planet. I was struck, and this is really sincere, I was struck by how much my, and of course that of many of my colleagues, human sciences perspective is in tune with what the speakers presented, for I heard in them a challenge to the dominant biomedical model of Western medicine. And I will, with these pages, I want to invite you to see us in the human sciences as also doctors, as also treating illness. There is a reason why we are here together in this room, and it's not just because we are human beings or because we speak a common language, which is English. It has a disciplinary reason. At the core of the building of these alliances lies a shared conception of a human body as an embodied mind that can only come into being thanks to others. As we know, we are born prematurely, ill-equipped to survive on our own, and as such dependent on the environment and most importantly on other humans. And one must wonder, I'm echoing here Sunil Amrit when he spoke at the beginning of the afternoon, one must wonder how in the modern West we came to believe that out of utter defenselessness, we can develop into quote unquote self-sufficient units that we call individuals. A human body produces biological involuntary actions, say the interactions of cells and organs, but cannot survive without the voluntary actions, intentional and unintentional, that address others to secure its existence. The human sciences study the forms, the data in which this address happens. Systems of symbols that are interpretable by others. Our need to be interpreted and to interpret transforms our survival into an experience rather than a biological fact. An awareness of how the interaction with the world of others shapes us, and in turn, how we shape the world. This means to say that our survival depends as much on food as it does on the symbols to address our need for food to others. The most inarticulate cries of a baby need a first interpreter whose wisdom must be to decode these cries and most crucially for my discipline, assign meaning to them. In the human sciences, it is assumed that our dependence on symbols is so dire that we cannot adequately or fully understand human bodies unless we study the symbolic systems and the institutions they build that sustain their life. The subject matter of the human sciences, as well as the material of artistic practices, is a world of symbols, of representations, of interpretations, in brief, the world of language. While the capacity to vocalize or articulate symbols, that is, the capacity to communicate, may have genetic codes, the internal logics of symbolic structures do not. Otherwise, we would not be able to explain why a woman's neck, orderly covered in silky white worms, is a sign of beauty in a culture and a sign of death in another culture. The logic of symbolic systems on which we thrive depends on things such as metaphor. I'm not going to go very detailed into technicalities here. Language have a poetic function that mediates human experience as much as the function of communication does, to such an extent that it shapes the experience of our globally, biologically determined needs. We study how symbols function, but also how they come about, their history, their material conditions of emergence, their mutations, their impact on the world, as well as the feedback loop that they generate. The world in turn forces to shift symbolic structures. For us, it is different to kill an animal for a communal dinner after having made peace with it, because it is seen as part of our common home, than to kill an animal because we consider it as an object of private property. Consider the fundamental difference between seeing the unity of land and people as part of a community's identity and seeing this very same unity, the land and its people, as a compound object of property granted by a king. I am here referring to the Spanish colonial property regime called encomienda, which granted Spaniards land plus its people, land with indigenous communities in it, communities that saw themselves as part of the land in a very different way. It is different to tolerate labor pains if a woman envisions that a struggle among evil spirits is happening in her body, or if she remembers the biblical teaching that, quote, in pain shall women bear children, unquote, or if she succumbs in anguish because there is no hospital in sight, or if she sees them in others, given that she envisions her role as having no part in biological reproduction. To take a medical example, it is different to be anemic because the phrase, I want to look like Britney Spears, determines what I eat, or because food connotes the toxic invasiveness of a caregiver in childhood, or because of a physiological process which in turn leads to the word anemia, which in turn has to be interpreted through the logic of symbols. We may ask, what's the real difference if we're all eating? We all inhabit the land. All pregnant women experience pain at childbirth. We may ask what the difference is if we see our child as a shining star that enlightens our days, or the obstacle that prevents the self-optimization that a 24/7 consumer society demands. In the human sciences, we study symbolic structures because they guide human action. They are agents, if one wishes. A child will be protected if it is the shining star. It will be abandoned if it is a burden. Symbols orient our ways to inhabit the world. We may ask what kind of animal we are to need symbols in order to act and react in the world. What happened that our biology does not immediately and automatically tell us what to do in the world? How lost can we be? Our dependence on symbols cradles our becoming human in the experience of uncertainty, of doubt, of lacking in orientation. We need to make sense of the world in which we live. We must make meaning to survive. And here is where I'm inviting you today to see that in the human sciences and artistic practices, we study and, shall I say, treat an all-consuming human illness too. The obsessive quest for meaning, the anguish, the fevers, the indigestions, the congestions produced by the lack of meaning. Human animals are animals that suffer from the medical condition that I call meaning-making. An impassioned escape from biological determination into the freedom of creation. In their quest for meaning, some communities, such as ours, will obsess about things such as having individual names for everyone to be recognized. Others about finding their non-human animal twin soul. Some obsess about finding truth by ripping nature apart. Others by locating their role within nature. Everything needs to have a meaning for humans. And here we must include terms such as health, care, planet. How is it that genetics did not offer us clear meanings for anything? Let's take the word health. Does it mean happiness? And what does that mean? Does it mean to have vitals within statistical parameters of a given population, and which population? Does it mean to allow the sun and the moon to guide our internal clocks? Why? We have invented electricity. Does it mean to aim for balance in a profit system that throws the world into permanent imbalance? Because we seem to have lost the compass that gives us the exact location and role in our planet, meaning-making is a human illness that generates great contestation with it, which we contain in institutions, such as the hospital. The three speakers today have shared how they envision change in the institution of the hospital by making the world of symbols an essential component of their practice. They treat the human illness of meaning-making as part and parcel of their practice. They do not stop at what some have called, quote, humanizing biomedical care. That would be to take the human sciences and the arts as a footnote in the handbook that defines health. We know how many of us stop to read footnotes. Treating the human illness of meaning-making as crucial does not lead to the replacement of biomedical care. That would be anathema to critical thinking, insofar as it would imply that there is an ultimately superior way to produce knowledge. Rather, it expands the notion of the human in response to a political crisis. We, as humans, face the possibility of extinction. Let's recall how history has shown us that other civilizations have produced such imbalances in their relation to nature that they have collapsed. What I take the speakers to be saying is that ecology is as important as biology. Meaning is as important as physiology. I cannot be but a happy camper today. And thus, I am inspired to ask questions in order to open the discussions. My first question would be that one of storytelling. I would like to start by asking about the tipping point, if there was any, in your careers, when you felt the need to explore how the world of symbols shapes human beings. Did you feel the biomedical model was failing you? When was that? How did it happen? My second question is one of implementation. You talked a lot about implementation. I ask myself this question permanently as I exercise my profession in an educational institution. Connectedness, which is a word that came up a lot. Relationality cannot be understood without its opposite. This is a question of the logic of symbols. In our times, as the narrative of relationality in planetary social movements rises, it conflicts more and more with what Susan really very clearly showed in her slides, institutional frameworks, public policy, and political action oriented toward furthering a narrative of disconnection, competition, privatization, isolation. As I suggested before, these narratives lead to actions. Actions in turn operates as a feedback loop to change or confirm these narratives. I weekly face, and I want to share this with you, the angst of the youth whose belief is that they have no power to influence the current state of affairs, despite the fact that they grew up, and I pointed this in my class last week, with the narrative of freedom of choice. I try everything I can to offer an alternative to the vision that we have no other solution than to remain isolated, locking eyes with screens, rather than humans, let alone other forms of human life. There seems to be a mismatch between the vision of a collective agreement and the vision that keeps our current institutions and political conflicts fueling. To put it simplistically, some social agents see the need to reimagine our healthcare and the health of the planet, but at the same time, others view the planet as a repository of minerals to be scavenged with no sense of limits. These minerals will be in turn used for iPhones, which in turn have been proven to harm humans with none other condition than addiction. Some of us want life, but we have to face those who continue to enact death. Some would argue for degrowth as a solution. I don't know what I would like to hear you on this. To continue with iPhones, we would look at the example of high schoolers who are choosing flip phones instead. Others would see degrowth as an impossible alternative to the current technological acceleration propelled by the advent of AI. A much faster acceleration than the one initiated in the 1970s, identified by many scholars as a pivotal moment in what concerns planetary damage. The stakes are high, and I think probably Susan mentioned some of this, because there is yet another dimension in this mismatch. How to make change desirable. Not just how to communicate its necessity. Changing the frame of our desires may help in the implementation of change. Artistic practice here is powerful in stirring desires, emotions, rather than consciousness. And our three speakers shared their very strong investment in such practice. The Western vision of desire is framed by lack, scarcity, competition, probably a result of a vision of human life as outside of nature rather than part of it. We are taught that desire means to seek objects that we do not have. In other words, to desire permanent insatisfaction. The desire to desire. In terms of our home planet, this translates as desiring to inhabit another planet, not this one. Our crisis in political imagination is also a crisis in what concerns how we understand desire. I have had this conversation with many colleagues, including climate scientists, who not only wonder about reaching political agreements, but also making them desirable. And I wonder how the three of you see this problem. And the third question is something that came up in a recent conversation I had with a colleague who's a chronobiologist visiting Yale Olympic. And we were talking about the proposal that has been going around in international circles for One Health. What would be the practical consequences of such approach, for instance, in terms of the definition of animal health, plant health, ecosystems health? What new considerations are there in terms of the cost of non-human animal life for the sake of the survival of human life? Is this an approach that decenters human life and manages to undo the Western idea of human exception? Does it manage to translate non-Western traditions of health and healing? Of course, the question of translation for people in my field is absolutely crucial, and it can lead to a whole new afternoon, right? It would be a point to follow, but I will stop here because I know that Asia is going to control my time, right? Yes, okay, so thank you very much.
Beautiful, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Fradinger, for giving us those wise words and perspectives and kind of bridging us doing those concluding remarks. At this time, we're going to open the floor for a question and answer series. We'll kind of go throughout. I will make sure to pick on folks as they raise their hand in the order that they raise their hand. But if you kindly introduce where you're coming from, who you are, but just a name, that should be more than enough. And then what question do you want to address? If it's a general question to everyone or a specific speaker, and I'll make sure to moderate that accordingly. Does that sound good with everyone? Beautiful. All right, so without further ado, I will start with the question. Oh, love it.
I have a
Like, yes, let's
question.
get right to it.
I don't understand. I am, my name's Holly Randall. I'm a doctor of nursing, psychiatric clinical nurse specialist, and I've also worked with ayahuasca for 10 years, facilitating ceremonies in my past. And I was so thrilled with the feeling of hope that was generated until the end. And I'm sorry, but I just got so depleted, and I just don't believe I want you all to give your answers, because like talking about desire as something that is a problem for humans, when humans are we're forced to want to grow, and that's our spirit. We need to learn, and that's why we may screw up everything and destroy everything, but it's really to me it's a positive thing. So I just really had some it was just really hard to hear it after having so much inspiration. I don't really know what my question is, but I just had to pull it back. Let's sing, do some music or do some healing. Yeah, I think talking about meaning making as an illness, and when I think meaning is not it's not an illness. I don't think it's something that it's making. We have meaning. We come here with meaning. I don't know. I was good, but now I'm bad. So.
And these are great, right? And these sessions allow us to see the multidisciplinary focus of what we do, right? The perspective from the medical humanities, the perspective from nursing, the perspective from our physicians, right? And I think it's so helpful to kind of engage in a dialogue, parse some of these things out, right? And this is the opportunity that we have that. So I think it's helpful, right, to kind of look at these questions. So I'll pass it over to Dr. Fradinger to kind of talk about your lens from humanities lens, and then give an opportunity for our speakers to see how they envision some of the words from Dr. Fradinger and some of those questions and reflection, if that helps out for the audience. I did see a second hand, and I will make sure to come. I saw a couple of folks, so we'll address this first question and just quickly brief kind of make it a quick 1 to 2 minute discussion. That way we know kind of what's going on. I know 1 to 2 minutes is tough to answer that, but we'll try our best to make sure we allot enough time for our audiences.
So, do you want me to clarify what I meant by meaning making as illness? Because maybe the word illness has a bad connotation for you. I'm wondering, right? For us, it's just a condition. It's a condition. We need to make. We cannot survive without making meaning. It is something that we seek. And it is something that may lead to balance or imbalance, right? You can live through life, and this is the situation in my classes. You can live through life without meaning, without purpose, right? So what I meant by using the word illness, which in your, I take it that you're a native speaker of English, in your language may have a negative connotation. From where I'm coming, it just means a condition, and the human condition is such that it needs this to make it better, to make it function, to make it survive, right? So it's not a question of the disease, it's a question of how we need to function and what happens when making meaning is not available for us. Am I making sense to you?
I think it's the other way around, or
Yeah, happy to hear from other perspectives too, right? So we'll go around to what does meaning look like, right? So the question that I'm hearing is, how do we define meaning, and what does that look like within nursing? We're hearing from medical humanities. What does that look like from our physician colleagues, right? So how do we find meaning? How do we find purpose in the work that we're doing? How do we promote that interrelationality? How do we create that oneness, right? I'll have Dr. Costa speak. Quick 1 minute, kind of making sure we know what we got going on, and then I'll pass it across to Dr. Prescott as well as Dr. Azier.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question, because I think when you said that, Moira, I was like, huh. Like because I feel like all of the talks today, right, and the use of creative expression is a way to make meaning of things that we can't process, right, or can't understand. And I think I appreciate your description, because I think the word illness is where I went off.
Right.
Right. And I think and I think to your point, excuse me, that's disciplinary differences, right? With language, with definitions. And I think when you explained it as a condition, right, that human beings require, right? I think and this is your point, that we require and need to make meaning of everything. And we do that with language, and we do that with the care that we give. And that's what all of us talked about. And so I don't think, at least from how you explained it more, I don't think it's as much as a difference as I think if we remove the word illness, it would make sense.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Costa. Dr. Prescott.
We are living in a great mystery. This journey of life is something that I think is our purpose, at least I see my life, is to find my purpose, is to find, and that brings me meaning. I think that we're all on this incredible journey. We all have our utterly unique experience of being in this universe, and yet we're all coming from that same source. So in a very deeply spiritual way, I see this as really the universe experiencing itself through us. And our purpose is to experience, to discover as this infinite experience of a oneness, but the contrasts that are created in this experience are what make it real, what give us experience. The relationship creates our reality. Otherwise, there would be no experience. So one thing that struck me when you first began speaking was, I thought that I was working in the human sciences. So there's a lot of artificial distinctions and separations created, and constructs that we create in our universities, in our societies, that create this perception of separateness, that I'm doing something different. We're all really a lot more alike and have much more similar narratives than I think we assume. And we often, I don't see any separation. I'm living in a universe where I see the work that you're doing, that I'm doing, are all part of a beautiful tapestry of creativity. And the more that we can try and see those separate threads as part of the same story, the more that we will create a more beautiful picture, I think. So I try and break down some of these assumptions, judgments, separations as much as I can, because they're so instinctive. We do them without thinking, but can we try and blur our boundaries a little? Because I think I've probably used up my time, but yeah.
Beautifully said, Dr. Prescott. We'll wrap up the floor with Dr. AZA.
Yeah, I guess I think about Viktor Frankl when I think about the idea of how we make meaning. He was a psychiatrist who wrote the book, a powerful book, Man's Search for Meaning. He survived through the Holocaust, and how do you make meaning of that as a Holocaust survivor? And he posits that the ability to make meaning is not only fundamental, but it is essential to any therapeutic process, particularly within the psychological realm. And so I think that our ability to make meaning is both the key to our potential triumph as well as our devastation, and the flexibility by which we can make meaning of different events. Two people experiencing the very same thing can come out with two very different meanings. So I think it is a very powerful tool, this idea of symbolism, and how that gives us tools to make meaning, I think is super critical to our ability to create the kinds of worlds that we want. And so I don't view it as maybe even illness or health, but like a fundamental ongoing process that we have the choice and flexibility to shape. And the only other thing I'll say is that I do think there is also something fundamentally incomprehensible about the world that we're in, down to the atomic level, all the way up through the most sort of cosmic level, right? We can't even tell both the velocity, and location of, a subatomic particle. So I think there's something fundamentally about the world that we can't make meaning of, yet some of the beauty of the experience is that we are driven fundamentally to try to make meaning, whether in a conscious, intentional way towards health, or in an unconscious way that is driven by, environmental and social conditioning and context.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. AZA. I see a couple hands up, and as I'll have Sohani kind of talk, it's so interesting because I had a conversation with my youngest daughter, and one of the questions that comes up with her is, how do you make sense of a world that doesn't make sense, right? And I think it's such a beautiful kind of perspective for a child. She's 8 years old, to be able to make sense of that, right? And I gave the same kind of explanation too at Climate Week, where I said, baby, what do you want, a chicken wing or do you want the burger? And she's able to say both. But yet we can't hold the space and we're choosing one or the other, right? So this speaks to those different experiences that we all have as individuals. All right, I see Mike in the back. Yes, dear.
Yes, hello. This is Gabriel Hostin. I studied psychology with a focus in wellness and business at Harvard, and now researching at Yale, actually in psychedelics. So this question is mainly for AZA, but feel free to hop in as well. First off, on your studies, I was curious what kind of music was used in these studies, as well as what kind of music would you recommend in psychedelic experiences when I go to Jamaica, of course. So, and then also another thing I've been looking into, I'm curious what you think about solfeggio frequencies, if you've ever delved into those. Yeah.
Yes. So the different studies have, different sort of music depending on what questions we're asking. So we've studied everything from like jazz progressions to, ragas from Indian classical music. In the music mindfulness study, we had music that I call sort of ambient fusion. So it borrows a lot of the structures of familiar Western music with a very sort of soundscape that you were able to hear. And then there's the live musician is instructed to basically improvise over that using a very specific scale called the pentatonic scale. In the drum circle, the facilitator is trained in sort of different West African traditions. So that is a lot of the rhythmic structures that we're looking at in sort of the drum circle study. At Beckley Retreats, the music is a bit syncretic. It's a mix of different ceremonial music and plant medicine music and folk music from Jamaica, as well as a number of different South American cultures in which, you know, the initial sort of development of ceremonial spaces for plant medicine really happened. And then as far as solfeggio frequencies, we haven't gotten into that specifically yet. It is an area of interest, and there are a few people who have been talking with about how we might be able to study some of that. I would say from a more anecdotal context, people say that, you know, it helps them, you know, but there isn't a lot of what we would call kind of like Western hard scientific evidence for specific frequencies like, you know, 528 hertz, 432 hertz to have very specific cognitive or emotional context. But there's enough sort of, I think, layperson and anecdotal evidence there that I do think it's something to be researched and something we're interested in. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Azier. Thank you, audience, for a wonderful question with that. All right, I see Mike coming around. Thank you, Sohani, for traveling with the mic.
Hi, I'm Elisa Morrison. I teach in the Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies department at in Yale College. And I actually, for the most part, felt very like inspired and lifted up by the concept of humanities as human sciences. And so this is kind of it's an interdisciplinary question and one of language, I guess, also. You know, as I for a long time have used the term laboratory to describe my theater work and my live performance work with my students, to say that we are constructing a laboratory where we are studying, you know, one thing or another, whether it's you know, the impact of a certain narrative and why it abides over so much time or whatever. And I've been increasingly interested in my own research on audience engagement and in engaging embodied movement as a way of witnessing stories, particularly about trauma. And something that I have found is, and I heard this in pretty much every single presentation today, is the disciplinary divisions in terms of how we show what we're learning from this, like how we are validating results or making them visible. And I think it was maybe most explicit in Azier's presentation of like, so here's the people laying on the yoga mats, and here's the music and the drumming, and then here's the scientific graph and the brain scans and so I'm just very interested in how and also, I mean, in the stories that a nurse would tell, tracking onto, you know, about a traumatic or a secondary trauma that they continue to carry, and the statistics. And so I'm curious from the perspective of really all of you, how these different modalities of proof, how these different proofs, how they work together. Because sometimes, at least from where I sit, I feel this trajectory of, and then when we go to the brain scan, now it's really answered. Do you know what I mean? And so, and that's not, I don't feel resentful about it. I actually find it quite curious. It's just, since it's not my native language, for, you know, for lack of a better term, I also wonder, like, okay, so then what about, you know, if I don't have a clinically validated questionnaire that I hand out afterwards, but how, you know, how do we power share in some ways, in the, like, our funding structures are so completely different. Like, I can't have an MRI machine there in my, you know, poor theater, even here. So just throwing that out there. Yeah.
I think it's a great question. I saw Dr. Prescott's mic go, so I want to make sure we shift it over here. And if we've got questions over here, I'll make sure to address them accordingly. Dr. Prescott, I'll let you go first. I think this is a great question too, from a framework that I can speak on too, from an Indigenous person, because I think we speak a lot about drumming, and I think it's so important. I love that Dr. Azier spoke about this, right? We know that medicine drum, that dum 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 dum, right? When we join a medicine circle, we know what that causes. Indigenous people for the longest have known what that does to our mood, right? And so when we see science catching up, imagine how we feel. And we're like, Yeah, we kind of knew that dancing and stomping our feet and jingle dancing and fancy dress, right? That causes us to create a certain mood, right? And we've even seen studies with the SSRIs also kind of showing that there's no way that that indigenous strumming and dancing in those medicine circles is a lot better than some of the SSRI efficacy we see, right? So I do think that it speaks to some of that question of where are we looking for? So where do we implement this data? How do we show these results? How do we create transdisciplinary teams to be able to kind of do this? And because to me, what I see together, a multidisciplinary approach is what breeds the best outcomes, right? So this is what we're trying to do, this transdisciplinary approach, which I love that question. So I'll let Dr. Prescott kind of lead us.
I think you just said it all. But I was really going to say the same thing by saying that we can approach this like an orchestra where we all bring our own instruments, where we can all play those in our different ways to create a beautiful co-created symphonies, if you like, that brings all these elements together, because it's when they work together that we have, you know, different kinds of information and the experience of doing it together. So, you know, we need to create spaces. I think this is really important, and universities struggle to do this. But when they do create a centre that creates an opportunity for different schools, different faculties, different groups to come together, that's when things can really start working. Or outside the universities, even better, in the community. That's where it can really happen, when you bring people together and you add depth by data, but you really add experience and the richness of these really diverse perspectives, where they're not seen as competing against each other, because we've got to get that sort of siloed, competitive nature, the sort of combative approach to, you know, I've got a better answer than they have. So I'll leave it there.
Well,
and I think it's also, I'm
Go ahead.
sorry.
Okay.
I think it's also appreciation for the different types of knowledge and different ways of knowing, right? And I think that if you embrace that, and I think not feel that your way of knowing is superior to others, right? I think that there's room for a variety of ways of working together and recognizing that this is data in this field and it might not be data in another, but that doesn't mean it's still not data.
Beautiful. Dr. Pradinger.
Yeah, can I piggyback on that, Dina? Thank you for that question. We belong in the same area of campus, I think. I think that you mentioned the crucial word here, which is data. We work in the human sciences, and I'm going to explain that in a moment. We work with data exactly the same as your pediatric practice or your clinical practice when you scan brains. It's just different data. Our data are words, languages, symbols, metaphors, right? And we generate questions and hypotheses and we try to prove them. We go to a text or we go to a theater play and we find the meaning of that theater play according to the data, according to collecting evidence, if you wish, which for us are words. In the same way that you collect evidence with your interviews with the nurses or with brain scanning, right? I quickly want to say something to the fact, to what struck you as my use of human sciences. I was struck when I came to the US by the fact that I was labeled as a humanist instead of a human scientist. In German, the word for literature studies is Wissenschaft, Literatur, the science of the study of literature. This is Wissenschaft, this is science. So my question for you and for all of us would be, how did it came about that we are so divided in the Anglosphere? What happened that we consider data the brain scan, but we don't consider data your performance and my texts?
Beautifully said. Thank you, Dr. Pettinger. I want to make sure we have another question in the audience. I've got two more, and I think at this point we'll take these two, and then we'll wrap up with these two as a final question. So I've got some folks in the back and one in the middle.
Hello, I just want to say thank you again for such the beautiful presentations. My name is Mandy Amerige. I'm a fourth-year medical student at American University of the Caribbean, and I'm actually interested in applying into psychiatry. So I see you, Dr. Azier. So my question is sort of a general question, but I'll kind of separate it by the presenter. And we've talked about, again, the power of creative expression, collective healing. But within the healthcare space and burnout, I'm curious if you guys have created initiatives about your presentations within Yale, specifically with clinicians, nurses, students, residents, nursing students. Has there been something specific that like a study or programs or a continuous theme that you have created? So for Dr. Prescott, with the art therapy, is there something that has been used, or is there going to be an initiative to use that to heal or connect these different healthcare professionals? And for Dr. Azier, with the drum circles and even the psilocybin retreats, is Yale going to say, oh, we're going to create this retreat, whoever wants to come, as a way to connect and build camaraderie within our healthcare professionals? So that was my question.
I love the question.
Thank you.
So we'll address that. The first part, as I heard clearly, I just want to make sure with you. We'll go with nursing burnout first,
Yeah.
right? With Dr. Dina Costa, because you want to hear the healthcare perspective of what this looks like. We'll
Yes.
shift over to Dr. Prescott regarding the visual kind of paintings and how this can be implemented within the healthcare workforce. And then really looking at Dr. Azier and seeing how we can kind of scale some of this work that we're seeing with research and community building, community capacity, et cetera. Does that?
Yes, perfect.
All right, here.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
So Dr. Costa.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for your question. So I will say that there are a couple of ways that me and colleagues are addressing burnout. One is specifically at Yale. And then the other is sort of a broader study that we're doing. And so here at Yale, with partnership with the Yale New Haven Health System, we have developed a collaborative, we call it Collaboren, collaboratory on organizational learning about the nursing workforce. And we've just received some seed funding that is really allowing us to make a bridge between academia and clinical practice, specifically related to research and specifically related to research on the nursing workforce. Talking about divisions, right? I think nursing is a discipline that has lots of divisions, and particularly between academia and clinical practice, that's a pretty big one. And so what we are doing is leveraging health system data to answer questions about the YNHHS nursing workforce. Specifically, how can we minimize burnout? How can we address retention issues? What nurses are interested in coming to YNHHS? What nurses stay here as a way to both support strategic and operational decision-making about the nursing workforce regionally, but also to generate generalizable knowledge so that other people in other health systems can do that, right? Because one, with the current crisis that we have with the workforce, the solutions and the way that we have been doing it isn't working, right? And so individual mindfulness approaches are wonderful, but they're insufficient. And we need to think about organizational and system approaches. And so we're trying to do that here locally, and hoping that that scales up more broadly. And then I have another project that's looking at organizational resilience and clinician burnout, and how organizational resilience might be a way to mitigate individual clinician burnout in about 70 ICUs across the country. So
amazing.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Costa. Dr. Prescott.
Well, it's really inspiring to know that we have another generation of really enthusiastic physicians on the way.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, I use my own art in my narratives. I don't actually work in art therapy specifically. My main work is in planetary consciousness, into really promoting this awareness of the interdependence and interconnectivity. And the practical work that I'm doing in that space is through the Earthrise community, which is to create a contemplative community, if you like, a space where people can come and really not just bring their heads, but their hearts, because, all the work that we're all doing is really to bring that sense of deeper connection so that we can bring our whole selves to a situation so that we can begin to hear the wisdom of the group that is created by being together. In other words, I begin to hear greater wisdom when I'm with you, when we're together, when our shared consciousness creates something new. So this is a new idea, but it's really about kind of healing the individual while healing or creating something new in a group. So that's where I'm positioned at the moment. So
Thank you, Dr. Prescott. And Dr. Azier.
Yeah, so there hasn't been one sort of initiative, but there have been a number of different things that we've done in terms of having music mindfulness sessions, drum circle sessions for residents in psychiatry, both here at Yale, also at Howard. Recently, we had our first Elevated and Rooted retreat, which was specifically for healthcare professionals. And that was in Virginia, a very beautiful location. I think the idea of, Yale hosting psilocybin retreats for its faculty or professionals is something I would definitely support and help facilitate. But I don't know that it currently exists, and I don't know who the right person to talk to fund that would be.
To me.
But I would be happy to be a part of co-leading that initiative or facilitating it. But yeah, I think part of the idea is to create the evidence that the establishment can understand or that speaks the language of certain key decision makers so that we can then have what is considered the justification for saying this is something that you should fund for these different groups, and then being able to implement that at large scale. And a lot of our models that we're working with are particularly designed with that idea that, like, once we can prove this to the people who need to see the evidence in this format, it's very, very scalable at a rapid rate.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Azier. Thank you, dear, for the question. And we'll wrap up with our final question towards the back. I want to make sure that you get the mic because I know you've been keeping your hand up. And just keep in mind, too, if you have additional questions afterwards, you can also kind of connect with our speakers, with any one of us after the reception. So feel free to do that. And then we'll take our final question before we get into our contemplative session, which I'll lead, and then we'll wrap up shortly. So you have the floor, dear.
Hello, thank you so much for this experience. I'm Nellie Bizram. I live in South Florida. Yes, I came all the way from there here today. So I run an NGO that's actually a member of the Earthrise community that Dr. Prescott mentioned. And one of the projects or programs that we have is a program with girls from different communities around the world, implementing many of the modalities that you've shared. And so this is the research the data question that was asked really kind of prompted me to ask you about participatory action research, because we found that, yeah, we do the pre and the post, and we don't have the fMRI machine in our community, but we try to adhere to basic, good research principles. But what we're finding is that for the last two cohorts, we've actually been asking the girls to help us design some of the questions because we weren't always asking the right questions. And to include some of the sort of more reflective, artistic, cultural elements that allow them to, just allows them to elevate their own sense of cultural belonging in the design of how we're actually even what is important to ask and to collect. So this is a new area for us. I don't have expertise in this area. It's really just unfolding as it's emerging. And I'm just curious if you are using any participatory methodology in your work.
I want to make sure, is this addressed to anyone in the audience?
Is this to anything, the wisdom of the panel?
You got it, dear. Thank you. So we'll shift over. We'll talk with Dr. Fadinger. We'll do 1 to 2 minutes briefly, and then we'll wrap up with, we'll go that way. Actually, we'll start with Dr. Azier. We'll come this way around this time.
Okay. Yeah, I think that actually is super important. So one of the things that we do is after every experiment in our lab, we have focus groups. And we use those focus groups both to understand more deeply and more nuanced what things are working and what things we should continue to follow, but then to also improve on those very same things, like what questions should we not ask, what was confusing about these surveys, or what things would help make this more beneficial or accessible, feasible, acceptable, in the community. So that's one element of the participatory. And then before some of the study designs, like the music mindfulness study, we actually meet with all of our community partners and have multiple discussions in both the design and how the studies will be implemented. So we don't believe in kind of creating something in isolation, going into a community saying, oh, this is this really smart thing that we did, participating in it, and then tell us like how it worked. Because we just don't think that that's the way that we're actually going to solve the problem. So both before and after, we take very intentional measures to make sure that we're capturing sort of the needs and the perspectives of the communities that we're working with in these different studies.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Azier.
Consumer, or I really don't like that word, but community counsel and advice is actually becoming an essential part of most research protocols now. I don't know about here, but certainly in Australia and in the UK, you really have to consult with community if you're designing a study for a grant or anything like that. So I think it's becoming much more recognised as essential. And a co-creation process as opposed to, we're going to tell basically what you've already said, Azier. So I think that's vital. And pairing or developing partnerships between community groups and experienced researchers, I think, is another really great way of doing this because it doesn't mean anything if it has no relevance to the community that it's in.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Prescott.
Yeah. And so I agree with you, Susan. I think the UK and Australia are considerably ahead of the United States in this. I think the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, you can't submit a paper unless you specify how patients were involved in the research process, right? It needs to be specified in the articles. And so I think internationally, people are way ahead of us. Co-design is very common in the critical care literature, specifically with ICU survivors, so patients that have been in the ICU for prolonged stays and have significant psychosocial cognitive decline thereafter. There has been actually Australian researchers who have co-designed peer support interventions where the ICU survivors are involved in what they're going to do for peer support, what it's going to look like, how it's going to be created. And so I think there's lots of opportunity. I think it's a great way of doing it. In our work, I am not a CBPR, like I'm not a community-based participatory research. I've never been trained in that, but I think our fundamental approach within our CollabRN initiative has been to go and partner with the community, which is the nurses and the healthcare system, and say, what are the questions that you need answered and how can we most rigorously study that, right? And so I think it is an example of community engaged research, just a different community. But I think you're on the right track. And I think, yes. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Costa. Dr. Freininger, if you have anything to say regarding this in relation to research.
Well, I would ask the three of you what are the difficulties to implement these models, but I would want to quickly say something. In the human sciences, this is a very, very long question. Who gives voice to whom? And I particularly teach this problem in the context of Latin America. And we deal with films, texts, movements that, for instance, decided that they had to give voice to indigenous communities and so forth, and the reversal that they created, right? The revolts against this idea. So it's really very ingrained in what I do. The problem there, how did the idea appear that there would be a vanguard that would be entitled to give voice, to represent the voice of others? And I want to quickly translate this to the medical model, because when I go to the doctor here, I'm just receiving instead of being asked. what it means to me to be healthy, for instance, right? Going back to the meaning question. What can I do? What concerns me? It's more the concern of the doctor that I receive. So I think that when you say, Dina, that in the US, maybe there needs to be some work there. I want to ask the two of you, because you work in the US, right? How do you deal with this translated into the models in the hospital, right? The patient doctor relation, whereby the doctor gives voice to the patient all the time. I don't know if this clarifies something about the human sciences where I work.
Thank you, Dr. Fredinger. I know we're right at time, so I want to be respectful of time, but I want to kind of give a bonus. I want kind of our speakers to give one word that you want to leave the audience with for hope, whatever it looks like. But what is the one word that you want them to take home for today's session? Start with Dr. Fredinger as we kind of made our way around, and then we'll end with Dr. Azier now.
The one word that I want for us to keep in mind is alliance.
Alliance.
I think appreciation.
Oh, humility, humility, humility.
Love, of course.
Stole mine. Create.
Yes. Beautiful. We can give a round of applause to our wonderful speakers. I'll exit it so that way they can take their seat, and then I will wrap us up shortly. So if you all want to take your seat at the audience and join the audience, and we'll end with our contemplative session.
Oh, Christine, we have small gifts for our presenters today. So we just wanted to hand those out.
Sure. All right, we'll bring them up.
Yeah. Thank
If
you. Thank
all
you so
wanna come.
much.
Thank you, thank you. So Dr. Prescott, we'll bring you up. That way we can give you an applause and your gift. We've got Dr. Azier. Don't worry, Sohani, we'll get you doing it. Dr. Azier. Well, Dr. Dina Costa. Dr. Moira Fredinger. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. Right. So funny, I'm like, I don't even
Thank
know
you.
what my script is. All right. Let me grab my phone now. I've got a double mic. All right, so I'm going to take off my nursing hat in this moment. And if you all know, I am, as I said, I'm an Afro-Indigenous person. I am actually a chief of my tribe, which is very fascinating, right? So we can talk a little bit about, but I am the leader of the Two-Spirit people for our community. So it's really funny, as I was kind of gathering to contemplate this session, I was like, should I get my headdress? But I was like, no, that's too much for you, right? So I was like, let me just kind of guide and go through this. So I'm going to kind of lean into most of my worldviews from the Indigenous framework. So you'll hear me kind of say Mother Earth. Mother Earth for us is Hadoya Suanuyama. And that basically means Mother Earth for us, right? So you'll hear me do this throughout the contemplative session, but just keep in mind that these are kind of both my chaplaincy brain and spirituality, as well as my native background. All right, y'all. So before we start, I just want to reflect on our time together and on the powerful insights shared by Dr. Costa, Prescott, Alsop, as well as Fredinger. We acknowledge the depth and brilliance of their work, each weaving together science, spirit, and the humanities to illuminate new paths toward healing and planetary consciousness, much of what you heard today. Their presentations have offered us not only knowledge, but invitations, right? And this is what we're inviting you to kind of look at. To listen more deeply, to imagine more boldly, and most importantly, to act with greater compassion, as you heard from Dr. Prescott, with love. As we prepare for our contemplative session, we now turn inward, right? From our outward expression to sit deeply with these thoughts. So Hadoya Suanuyoma is not waiting for us to savor. Right? So Mother Earth is not waiting for us to save her. And these were the words that were echoed to me. I was at a powwow, and as I was dancing, we had lost one of our previous chiefs by the Death with Dignity Act in Oregon. And as you can imagine, that's a very difficult process to know and hear that the person who was going to pass away was going to name me as a successor. And so when I got this call, this was a person who had stage 4 peritoneal cancer, and was moving across the seat over and over again with the Zoom camera off because they were in Portland. And one of the words that they echoed to me was that we all come as one people, but we come from many canoes, right? And so that phrase for us is basically abanka yugo, right? Which means one canoe, many people. So it's really important for us to kind of center that as we look through this. So I invite you all to settle into a comfortable position. Allow your eyes to gently close if that's what feels right for you all. I want us all together collectively to take a slow, deep breath in and release it fully. So I will kind of guide you all. This would look like a nice deep breath all together collectively. Beautiful. And then we're going to exhale together. Exhale that out. Beautiful. And know with each inhale that we're inviting spaciousness as well as clarity, right? And then observe for each exhale where we're letting go of both tension and distraction. Now imagine yourself being on a path that winds through this vibrant landscape. The air we breathe is fresh, alive with possibility. Beneath our feet, we feel beloved Adoya Swanuyoma, grounding us. Above the sky stretches wide, and the cosmos provide us with the constant imagery and reminder of the infinite space for creative expression, compassion, and most importantly, collective healing. As we begin to trot along this path, we also notice that it carries the voices and visions of our wonderful colleagues and speakers. Right? And when we hear these wonderful colleagues and speakers who you had the privilege of hearing today, together we sense that healing power of this creative expression as though the air itself hums with music, words, and images that soothe the heart and strengthen our collective spirit. Like brushstrokes on Dr. Prescott's canvas or notes in a Dr. Azier song, you feel these expressions flowing through us, reminding us that creativity is not only medicine for individuals, but most importantly, nourishment for our communities and the planet we co-inhabit. On that very same path, we notice it's widening into a clearing where we, as a collective, sense a new story emerging for our planet, stories captured in the works of Dr. Dina Costa and Dr. Moira Fradinger. The trees, the soil, the water, and all sentience around us invites us into relationship. We realize in this deep reflection that planetary health is truly inseparable from human health. And the well-being of our Mother Earth and our physical bodies are simply one, woven together. Feel into this truth as we breathe, noting it, how it expands your sense of belonging, and most importantly, how it recoils your responsibility to all relations on this planet we co-inhabit. As you linger here, imagine a circle forming, each one of us gathered, bringing our own energy, medicine, and our own capacity for healing. Together, we are holding space, offering grace, listening deeply. And as that collective pulse begins to rise, rhythmic and strong, echoing like the drumbeat of unity, it is this drumming, that boom, 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 that is the heartbeat of us all. Perhaps you hear music in this circle, music that opens the heart and clears the mind, inviting mindfulness, connection, and even transformation. This is the sound of collective action, reminding us that healing is never in solitary. Moreover, it grows in relationship with one another, with our planet, and of course, with consciousness itself. I want you all to take a moment now to breathe in this circle of possibility. Let us breathe in creativity, planetary awareness and consciousness, and collective strength. Let us breathe out to the world compassion, vision, and hope for healing, both personally as well as globally. Now, slowly, as feeling comfortable, return to your own body. Wiggle those feet, kind of feel your way kind of going through this in this room. Feel the chairs that you're sitting on. Feel the ground beneath you, the rhythm of your own breath, and the shared presence of this community, the space that we created in this container. Witness and affirm those around you as you open up your eyes slowly, if you had your eyes closed. And don't let the words say, I see you, but let your soul say, we see you, right? In that unity. Know that the seeds planted in imagination can grow into action. Today and always, we choose to imagine a healthier planet where the power of creative expression and collective healing, as you heard today, strengthens our bonds, honors Mother Earth, and inspires actions and sustains life for generations to come. We're going to take one final deep breath in. And that's us receiving. And we're going to take one deep breath out. Right? And that's us releasing. And when you're ready, feel free to get right into our room today. All right, y'all. So we thank you tremendously for being a part with us. We're going to wrap up this session. We've got a wonderful presentation on the piano from Dr. AZA, who will guide us through his musical journey. And then we'll also see some of the works from Dr. Susan Prescott through a narrated kind of tour with information and blown up pictures of what these slides look like. So we welcome you all for the reception, food, drinks, etc. And we look forward to seeing you there. But thank you all for visiting. And to my South Florida connection, thank you for being from South Florida. All righty, dear. Such a pleasure. Right.